Wow. Egyptian porn is weird.
All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to episode 27, I think, of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I'm your host, Kieran Midhead.
And I'm Deusdaecon, back once again.
You're like Carrie Elwes, just chained by the ankle to this show now.
Sounds good.
Yep. And tonight we're going to be covering several attempts at, and you can tell what time of day we're recording this at, several attempts at making by Universal to remake their classic film, The Mummy, from the early to mid-90s, before Stephen Sommers took over. And it's actually a fairly complicated process. And before we get started on this, we're going to give the briefest of Mummy movie overviews, because if we go too in-depth on this, we're just going to be here all night bitching about stuff, particularly the Chinese one.
Oh, Christ.
And also, I should mention, I'm going to be discussing things that are directly relevant to the Universal Mummy movies, because if I covered all the Hammer movies and all the other Mummy movies and Wrestling Women versus the Aztec Mummy, we'd be here for like 48 hours and still not finish.
Yeah.
Like, there's more Mummy movies than there are people in China, I have no doubt. And so it all started, like, the idea of a living mummy kind of sprang out of what was called Egyptomania, which started in the 19th century. It began because of Napoleon's campaigns in Egypt, which brought sort of the ancient Egyptian culture into the public eye, and the discovery of the Rosetta Stone just unlocked Egyptian history and archaeology, and that just set off a tidal wave, which really kind of crested and culminated with the discovery of King Tut's tomb in 1922. So for the better part of a century, there was this great fascination with Egypt and mummies and all that, to the point where people were surreptitiously buying mummies as conversation pieces and grinding them up and, like, snorting them as medicine and stuff. It's really kind of bizarre when you read about it.
Wow. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it gets weird. And the first living mummy story I can think of is Lot 2 something something. It's a number. And it was written by Arthur Conan Doyle, and it's a story I've heard about but never read.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that one as well.
And there's another, well, it would have been Edwardian by this point, because it was published in 1900-something, which was Bram Stoker's The Jewel of Seven Stars, which has a mummy in it and Egyptian themes, but it's not specifically like a walking mummy story. And it's a really good book. It's also known as that other Bram Stoker book that was made into a movie.
Yeah.
Not very good movies either. The only decent one is there's a really shitty one that has, like, Louis Gossett Jr. in it and, like, Al from Home Improvement. No joke there. He's in that movie. And I'm like, I remembered seeing that, and I'm like, was that Al from Home Improvement? And this is like 15-year-old memories. And I went and looked it up, and I'm like, holy shit, that really was Al from Home Improvement.
It's probably not a good sign for the actor that all you can say about him is Al from Home Improvement. And that's his whole name.
I mean, it doesn't say much when the rest of the actors are nothing. But the Hammer version is alright, and yeah, the Hammer version's okay, Blood from the Mummy's Tomb. That's an interesting watch. But to move on, like, the first proper mummy film was Universal's The Mummy in 1932, which was the second big starring vehicle for Boris Karloff after Frankenstein, and it's interesting when you think about it as the second Karloff film after Frankenstein, because it's such a different film from what Frankenstein is, because Frankenstein is very much a straightforward sci-fi monster movie, gothic film.
Yeah.
And The Mummy is this hypnotic, dreamlike film where you're, like, get drawn into this specific state of mind. It's a very different sort of film. It's very atmospheric. It's not a straightforward horror film, and it's not the film you would expect, because it's the later movies that informed what we think of as mummy movies. Because, I mean, Karloff spends the majority of the film in, like, a regenerated human form, and he's very much a sorcerer. who could like make people, who can like kill people and stop their heart from a distance. He has like this special pool which he views from a distance. And he's one of the more sympathetic Universal monsters while still being a complete and total bastard, because he's a guy who basically was killed for love.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't stand the fact that his love had died, so he steals the Scroll of Thoth from the temple to bring her back.
Mm.
And there's this really it's a nice, relatively subtle bit of supernatural elements, because he opens up the base of the statue and steals the scroll from underneath it. And as he's doing it, he looks up and he sees the crossed arms of the statue with the crook and the flail. One of them moves and points at him.
Nice.
And he just runs away. And I find that very interesting in a 1930s Hollywood film that basically comes right out and says that Egyptian gods are real.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting.
And at the end, he's defeated by his reincarnated love, who has regained her memories of her time as a priestess of Isis, and she prays before the statue of Isis, and it lifts up its hand holding an ankh and then zaps him to death with it.
So quite literally, Deus Ex Machina.
But it's actually set up decently.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to The Mummy, you can kind of forgive Deus Ex Machina, because that's kind of the point, you know?
Yeah, and what's especially interesting is that it's kind of ironic that it's an ankh, because the ankh was the Egyptian symbol of life. But I mean, and that was probably done on purpose, because the screenwriter, John Balderston, was very well versed in Egyptology. In fact, he was a reporter who covered the opening of King Tut's tomb.
Oh, wow, okay. Didn't know that.
In fact, it was in his draft that all the Egyptian elements came in, because it was originally the story called Cagliostro, where it was this sort of, mysterious character who had, like, his abilities were all science-based. He had helped himself live forever with nitrate injections or something like that, and eventually it was considered too sciencey, not supernatural enough for Universal, so they brought in John Balderston, who had written Dracula, the movie, not the book, obviously, and had him sort of, punch it up as a supernatural piece, and so he brought, like, the Egyptian stuff he knew all about.
Also, I find it funny that we're talking about a creepy sorcerer mummy guy who sees things through his magical pool. Is he Mum-Ra? But I wouldn't be surprised if Mum-Ra is taken from that somewhere.
But yeah, there's this. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if the guys who created Thundercats. That is the right cartoon, right?
Yeah.
If they had seen the movie. And what's actually really interesting there is that there's this, like, I love the moment where he goes into flashback. And he's explained, because, I mean, they don't tell you from the beginning what the deal with Imhotep is. He explains to the woman Helen, over the course of, as seen in the movie, takes her to his place, shows her their past life in the pool. And while she's there, her dog is taken out of the room, and you don't see it happen, but it's implied that Imhotep's evil cat somehow kills it.
Right.
Which is ironic, considering how Stephen Sommers gave him a very different relationship to cats.
Yeah, they kind of changed that around.
Yeah, what's really creepy about the ending is that his plan to make her like himself is to turn her into a mummy.
Right.
Which is kind of hinted at in the Stephen Sommers movie, but it's different. So yeah, that's the big Mummy film, and you've not seen it, right?
No, unfortunately not.
No, it's one you should check out. It's not a movie for everyone. If people were to say they didn't like it, I'd understand it, but
yeah,
it is an interesting watch, and it's one of my favorites. It was one of the first Universal horror films I saw.
Yeah. Plus, I actually really like Boris Karloff in those kind of roles.
And he's wonderful, because he actually gets to speak, and... Well,
yeah, exactly.
He's wonderful in Frankenstein with minimal dialogue, but it's a very different role. You get to see him, use his regular voice. And he has this melodic sort of, mesmerizing voice where it almost sort of like lulls you into this mental state. It's used very well in the movie.
Does he still have the British accent?
Yes, I believe he does.
Right, okay, just curious.
Yeah, and his alias that he uses when going around is Ardeth Bey.
Oh yes, I remember that. That's why they used it in the
later
99 version.
Which they don't actually say it until Returns, but. And so yeah, that's the big one. That's the big one that basically informs everything except it doesn't, because everyone goes into the Mummy expecting a walking mummy, and that's not what the film is.
Yeah, I think it's because, in a way, it's kind of like Frankenstein. He's become, so iconic as the shambling bandaged corpse, you know?
Yes. And that's partly because when Universal, in their second big cycle of horror movies, they did The Mummy's Hand, which was the first of 4 movies. And I'll kind of only talk about this one. I'll talk about the other 3 very, very generally, because they get very formulaic, and they're all pretty much the same movie. But they introduced a new mummy character named Garris, who is the shambling sort of mummy figure.
Yeah.
Who's being controlled by an ancient Egyptian a modern Egyptian priest who's trying to punish those who are looking for this princess's tomb and desecrating the area. And it has that kind of adventure movie tone that the Stephen Sommers films eventually went for.
Yeah.
So he basically took the background of the 32 film and some of the characters and took the tone of The Mummy's Hand and put them together.
Right, okay.
And that one's pretty good, and the mummy in that one is played by a cowboy actor named Tom Tyler, who did some serials, including Captain Marvel, who would later belong to DC.
Oh, right.
And his mummy, the makeup is really good on him, and they do this really creepy thing where right as he's going to kill someone, they'll switch to a close-up, and they went frame by frame and blacked out his eyes.
Oh, that's a nice technique.
And
I like that.
It's a very unnerving effect. I remember seeing the movie as a kid, and it's not a terribly scary film. It's like an adventure movie.
Yeah.
And then that happens, and it's like, ooh. Like, it was really creepy as a kid. And then, one thing that's kind of shows its budget a bit is that they do the ancient Egyptian flashbacks, but they do it by using stock footage from the flashbacks in the first movie and substituting Karloff's close-ups for pictures of Tyler in Egyptian costume.
That's not great.
And then the sequels are more or less the same thing. Like, Garris gets resurrected by another priest who then goes after some people. Blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing for all 3 movies. And the actor changes to Lon Chaney Jr. between them, and he hated making those movies.
Oh, yes. I forgot it was Lon Chaney.
And he hated the makeup.
Mm.
It's a good thing they didn't go back and reshoot the close-ups for the flashbacks again, because that would have been hilarious seeing him in Egyptian garb.
Yeah.
It would not have worked at all. But, like, the most notable thing about them is that, okay, the third one, The Mummy's Ghost, ends, because it's set in Massachusetts, where the second one was set. It ends with Garris going into a swamp.
Right.
The fourth movie has him coming out of the swamp as it's being drained, only now it's in Louisiana.
It just magically teleported the entire swamp.
Yep. And if you actually add up the amount of years that are supposed to pass between the movies, the fourth one takes place in like the mid to late 90s. Because the first one's 1940.
Yeah.
The second one takes place 30 years later in 1970. And the third one takes place around the same time, like not long after. And then they say there's like a 20-some year gap after that. So yeah, bizarre timeline there, which is not the last time we'll see that. And so the next one we get, because, I mean, the Mummy was such a B-grade character even for Universal that he wasn't featured in the crossovers at the time. And in fact, he had to get his own separate Abbott and Costello film when that comedy group was on its own legs.
Yeah.
That film's okay. It's not as good as their other Universal Monster crossover, but it's fine. I don't hate it as much as most people, but it's okay.
I have little to no experience with Abbott and Costello, to be honest. So.
I have very little, and most of the films of theirs I've seen have been the really late ones when they were half-assing it and they couldn't stand each other anymore.
Right.
Like Abbott and Costello Goes to Mars is shit, but Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is awesome because it's a better crossover than the serious crossovers with the monsters because they actually share screen time. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. And so the next proper Mummy movie was the first Hammer film in '59, which was a direct remake of the Garris films, and it starred Christopher Lee as Garris, and he had Peter Cushing as the archaeologist. And honestly, if you take the Garris Universal films as a whole and look at them next to that movie's actually quite a bit better in terms of production value, writing, acting. Like it's actually a pretty solid film.
Yeah. It's kind of weird to have Christopher Lee in such a, monster role.
Well, at the time it wasn't so much, because only a couple of years before he was the monster in Curse of Frankenstein.
Oh, okay, so okay.
Which, no disrespect to Christopher Lee, but that's one of my least favorite interpretations of the Frankenstein monster.
Right.
Because he's just a walking plot device, and the movie's really about Peter Cushing being a douchebag.
Right.
Like, literally, watch that movie. It's basically Peter Cushing being a total just bitch queen.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's funny about that series. This is a tangent, but it's like, he gets more and less evil in between each movie. Like, sometimes he'll be a little nicer, sometimes he'll be a little douchier. It's really quite bizarre. I mean, it at least makes it different each time, unlike the Dracula movies, which just got boring.
Mm.
But yeah, so that was the last really, I mean, Hammer did more Mummy films, but they weren't sequels to that movie. They were very much just movies with another mummy in it.
Right, so they didn't really continue any of that. They just kept doing new ones.
And that's probably for the best, because they ended it on a nice little note with him sinking into the swamp at the end.
Yeah.
A swamp in England this time, so presumably if they did a sequel, he would pop up in Massachusetts.
Yes. Oh, yes, the very well-known swamps in England.
It's a bog.
Yeah, okay.
It's a bog.
But, I mean, what I think is interesting about the Mummy as a character, right, is that, unlike Dracula, unlike Frankenstein, he's not really a single character.
No.
So I think that, in a way, that's kind of the problem of making him iconic, is that you can't really pin him down to a personality, because he's changed his personality, he changed his character, he changed his persona. They're all similar, but you still know they are different. So I think that's kind of the problem they had.
Yes.
With the character?
Yes, and it's because the thing that's iconic about the Mummy is the visual picture of the mummy in bandages walking around, which comes from Garris, but people don't really know those movies, which is interesting. They're kind of obscure by universal standards.
And if you say the Mummy to anyone who knows movies, they'll say Karloff. Yeah, Karloff.
And even then, they might not necessarily know that movie.
No, they just associate Karloff with the Mummy and not really know why.
No, but they do know that awesome Art Deco poster.
Oh yeah, I think that's the number one thing people remember.
Because I have like a 3D sculpture of that poster. It is awesome.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's my that's one of my favorite Universal movies for anyone listening. Which I know it's not one of the usual suspects at all, but I love that movie.
Yeah.
And if anything, I think what solidified that image is the fact that it's a simple image, and the fact that I think more people might know the Hammer Mummy than some of the Universal ones.
Possibly.
Really, I mean, I don't think there wasn't an official Mummy movie again until Stephen Sommers in '99. And that is, considering what Stephen Sommers made after that, is a surprisingly good film.
Yeah, it's by far one of the best films he's ever done.
And it's one of the best unofficial Indiana Jones movies, too.
Yeah.
Like, it really is Raiders of the Lost Ark in its tone.
Yeah, it's got that kind of tone, yeah, definitely.
It actually sold Brendan Fraser as a badass, which at the time was like...
Yes, absolutely. Because at the time, he was very much the kind of, I want to say, the dorky character.
Yeah, he did a lot of comedies. He was best known for George of the Jungle at the time.
Exactly, so that was a big surprise, and he does it really well. Yeah, well.
Yeah, he completely sells that character. He's still a goofball in the movie, but he completely sells his competence.
Yeah. You know what sold me as him being a really good action star?
Yeah.
It's the scene at the beginning where they're fighting the Arabs.
The Tuaregs, or whoever they're supposed to be.
And he's got the lever action rifle, and he's firing, and he's got bullets in his mouth. And he's just firing and moving. That is such a cool moment. But
no, the film has a really fun pace to it, so much so to the fact that when the horror scenes happen, they actually are kind of shocking.
Yeah, it's a very good mix of, you've got the action, but you have really quite dark, scary moments. And they do both very well.
Yes, and of course, and the cast is great. I mean, Rachel Weisz is great, even if she does end up playing a completely different character in the sequel.
Oh yeah. They change her personality. Christ.
But no, she's very good at that. John Hannah's probably my favorite in the movie.
Oh, John Hannah's great, yeah.
Yeah, I love how he's just so, like, I mean, he's funny in that, but you never want to see him die.
No, he's not comic relief that's annoying, which is quite rare.
Like, it's all well written into his character that he's always been the flake.
Yeah, in some ways, the character of Benny is the annoying comic relief.
But he still works.
He still works, yeah.
But no, the whole idea of the lost city in the middle of the desert, even though I have no clue how it hides in a mirage to this day.
Yeah. I always considered that was like magic.
But what I really like about it, the reason why I think it works as a remake is because Imhotep as a character is still very much the same person, if a little bit more destructive.
Yeah, he's a little bit more psychotic.
Because they give him the whole apocalypse powers, which, when I think about it critically, it's like they're just kind of window dressing.
Yeah. Well, they don't actually do anything. They just happen and then stop.
And I'm like, yeah, I don't really buy he's going to wipe out the world.
No. That's not even his goal. He doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, it just kind of feels like it was there to up the stakes. I do like the sandstorm. With his face, and that CGI, I think, has aged fairly well.
Oh yeah, that still works quite nicely. Because it's not overly done, and it's very subtle.
Yeah, it's actually kind of cool, and that seems to become a Mummy series trademark because they're using it in the new movie.
Oh, God's sake.
But it actually does look kind of cool when she does it in the one trailer, but whatever. I think that was a lot of people's introduction to Oded Fair.
Oh yeah, that was like one of the first things that was like major for him.
And really, he hasn't done a whole lot since. Like, I mean, the most notable things he's done since was Resident Evil.
Yeah.
Which he's
Afterlife as well.
Yeah, no, Retribution.
Was it Retribution, was it?
Retribution was the one in the underground base with the clones.
Oh, those all mixed together.
Afterlife is the one with Captain Cold in the prison.
Oh, yeah. Prison Break. Resident Evil. Yeah.
But no, the movie's great. Arnold Vosloo is, for a guy who speaks basically a made-up language, which is reconstructed ancient Egyptian.
Yeah, he really does play that with gravitas.
I mean, he brings a real presence to the role.
Yeah, especially, I mean, there's some moments where he just shouts random Egyptian phrases.
And it still works.
It still works, yeah.
And then at the end, when the Ankhsenamen mummy gets brought back to life and then she gets killed, you buy that he is seriously upset about that. Like, yeah,
he really puts a lot of emotion into those scenes, and he's really goddamn convincing.
Yeah, he's great. He's the best. He's one of the best things in that movie. Everybody's one of the best things in that. Like, even the dad from Jumanji is pretty cool in his role.
Yeah.
But yeah, that movie's really, really good. And then the sequel happened. Basically, the way that sequel happened was that the day after the movie came out, Universal called up Steven Sommers and said, "We want another movie now."
Yeah, get it done. Doesn't have to be pretty. And it was.
And it's a movie I attach a certain amount of nostalgic value to. But it's a film where it is incredibly flawed.
Very.
Like, the kid is just stereotypical movie kid.
I mean, he might as well be Jake Lloyd. He's that annoying.
And I'd argue, I actually think the character gets even more annoying when he's an adult in the third movie.
Oh, God, yes.
Basically, what is it? You have this secret society of bad guys who are doing bad guy things, which are never explained.
They resurrect Imhotep, but we never really find out why.
Because they want him to fight the Scorpion King, but it's not explained how they know about any of that.
Yeah, but there's not much plan after they do that.
No, they just kind of know things. It's not explained how they know any of this, why they're doing it. It's just kind of there.
I mean, I suppose you could argue because they're being led by, a reincarnated version of Anck-su-namun.
Which, that makes no goddamn sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Especially because in the first one, he's like, oh, Evelyn is Anck-su-namun resurrected.
Which they forget about that like 5 minutes after it happens.
Yeah, they do.
But, yeah, returns. She's the reincarnation, but she doesn't have the soul inside her. That's not how reincarnation works. Yeah,
it's really weird.
But yeah, Mummy Returns, it's got moments, but it doesn't quite work, and then the CGI, Dwayne Johnson at the end.
Oh, God, yeah.
back when he had hair, which is just a weird thing to think about nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
And that, like, Mummy Returns, it's there, like, there's some funny stuff with the pygmies. Particularly Jonathan, like, saying, oh, we'll be fine in the burial ground.
Yeah, well, most of the comedy comes from John Hannah.
And what's crazy, he's like, all I like about it is that he gets out the rifle and he's actually a good shot.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also full of just really stupid shit, like Brendan Fraser outrunning the sun.
Oh, yeah.
Prefiguring Marky Mark outrunning the wind.
Huh.
And just kind of needless callbacks to the first one. Like, I mean, I can watch the movie, but I don't like it anywhere near as much as the first one, I can say that.
Yeah, and there are, like, moments like Evie gets killed, but then she gets brought back, which apparently has no consequences whatsoever.
Nope.
But then in the third one, we find out she's actually a Time Lord and she's regenerated. And...
Oh, yeah. But, yeah, and then that led to the Scorpion King spin-off, which is an alright sort of, Conan-esque sort of sword and sorcery film.
It's pretty ancillary, though.
Yeah, it's ancillary, but it was so, like, the only other Mummy thing for, like, years and years and years, to the point where they had, like, a 3-movie box set of those.
Yeah.
And then 6 years later, out of nowhere, comes Tomb of the Dragon Emperor.
And we all don't want it.
We all suffered from that one, man. It was rough. Talk about a complete waste of Jet Li and Michelle Yeoh. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And Maria Bello was a good actress, but she's just shit in that film.
Yeah, and that's totally phoning it in.
Like, yeah, she had just gotten, like, an Oscar, I think. So she was just like, hey, I'll do this. Like, Rachel Weisz had just got an Oscar and kind of left. And Maria Bello had just come off an Oscar, too, so.
And there's, like, it's got a weird tone, because there's, like, weird, like, sex jokes and.
Yeah.
Failing marriage jokes
and the teen romance bullshit.
Yeah.
Which I can explain why that's there. It's because the guys who wrote it also were the creators of Smallville.
Oh, God.
It's a shit film.
And
because
awful.
that film came, there's not much else to say about it, really.
I mean, the only thing you need to know is that there's a scene where Jonathan screams, "Spank my ass," and he also lets a yak vomit in a bag.
And he pledges his love to the vomit, to the yak.
To the vomit. Yeah, I think that's about right. But yeah, I mean, that's all you need to know. It's garbage.
And O'Connell has yet another pilot friend.
Yeah.
and yes, and Alex is now grown up and he's even more annoying and he's way older than he should be.
Yeah, he's just an obnoxious twerp.
He looks like he's almost Brendan Fraser's age, which is hilarious.
Yeah. Go on.
He has one terrible line where his Australian accent comes out. He's like, it's not about size, it's about stamina.
Oh, and that same scene has the most ridiculous moment. And it's so ridiculous that when I did the review, I had to point it out. Is that O'Connell says he killed the same mummy twice because there was a dispute about how many mummies he killed. And then I just had to go through the series. He kills like 40 mummies. Yeah. And he doesn't even kill Imhotep twice. So he's wrong on both counts.
Yeah, Imhotep commits suicide in one of the, like, only really resonant moments of Mummy Returns.
Yeah, so it's like, fuck, that was terrible.
There's a guilty pleasure laugh I have in Dragon Emperor. Yeah. Because Yetis randomly show up out of nowhere.
Oh, yeah.
And they like, it's not a Shinto gate, but it's similar. And he like punts one of the bad guys over the gate, and they make it like it's a field goal.
Yeah,
it's so really it's so stupid I can't help but laugh.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, basically,
it's be dumb.
Here's how you know the movie is shit, that it keeps having to use the word mummy about 1 million times to justify the title.
And there is no mummies, ever.
No. There's zombies.
There's zombies, yeah.
There's Claymation Jet Li, who turns into ridiculous CGI Ghidorah, as well as something from Where the Wild Things Are.
For no reason.
And I'm not joking. That's exactly what he turns into in the movie.
Yeah, it's true. And then he goes into a cave and plays with his balls.
Yes. And we'll not explain that part. Oh, and he has a sword fight with Michelle Yeoh, which is completely fucked up by Rob Cohen being a shitty action director.
Yeah, you can barely tell what's going on.
Yeah, did we mention Stephen Sommers had nothing to do with this movie?
And you can tell, because at least he would have some kind of class.
Which is saying something considering the movie he did right before that was Van Helsing.
If you want to know my opinion on all these films, do watch my videos, because I don't want to repeat myself, and they are too terrible to visit again.
Yes, this one especially, because I had watched some review, because I saw it once in the theater, completely forgot about most of it. Then I watched a couple of reviews online and went, that's worse than I remember. Then I sat down and watched the fucking thing. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, reviews can't do that shit film justice for how shit it is.
No, it really is. Just bizarrely, kind of tonally insensitive, because they do this whole thing about the Great Wall of China is like a mass grave, which is just so wrong on so many levels.
And also, you can tell they couldn't film at the real Great Wall of China because it looks nothing like it.
No, and it's just a big hole. And then you got ridiculous moments where they just had to have Jet Li doing martial arts because it's Jet Li.
But he barely does any martial arts.
Yeah, but it's like there's a moment where he's attacked by assassins and it just turns into a massive martial arts moment.
I like the bit where they try and kill him with the firework and he kicks it into a streetcar and kills a bunch of people.
Oh, yeah! It just completely explodes a load of passers-by.
I'm like, congratulations, O'Connell. You're responsible for that.
Yeah. Fucking hell.
And also, the character's fucking up is the only reason why he comes back from the dead.
Yeah.
Which is true in the first movie, but they get a pass for that because they don't know this shit is gonna happen.
Yeah, exactly. They haven't got the foresight they really should have by the third film.
And it's just terrible. I don't know why they dug that up for another film 7 years after the last one.
And I think one of the other reasons why it doesn't work as well as the other two, to say the least, is because the other two actually had a modicum of research when it came to Egyptian mythology.
Oh, it definitely did.
Whereas in the third one, they gave no shits about Chinese mythology.
Like, I mean, there were a few bullshit things like Anubis being evil and all that.
Yeah, but at least they actually tried something. Whereas in the third one, there's nothing about the Chinese mythology at all.
Yeah, it's just kind of just token things.
It is.
And of course, the new Tom Cruise movie, which we're not completely diametrically opposed on this. You think it looks shit? I think it looks okay.
Right. Yeah. I think so far from what I've seen, yeah. Personally, I think I just can't see it as working because the effects look pretty shitty. It's very difficult for me to like a Tom Cruise movie anymore.
Ooh.
So, I mean, okay, I admit it might be just personal opinion on this. So maybe it's just not for me. And I am curious if Russell Crowe is going to be as pointless as he was in Man of Steel.
But I mean, I'm curious to see if because he's playing Dr. Jekyll, which is bizarre.
Yeah.
And I'm curious
if that's just a reference or not.
I'm curious to see if his hide is just a big bastard.
Well, that was what I was just saying, is that it might just be just a reference.
But I mean, he does have a fight scene with Cruise, so maybe he will turn into hide. I just don't want him to turn into big bastard Hulk hide because that's kind of been overdone.
With a Cockney accent.
Yes, yeah. But to get into the main topic here,
yes,
is that Universal's attempts to do a remake of The Mummy didn't start with Steven Sommers. They started in like the late 80s because they saw another studio had done The Bride, which was a take on Bride of Frankenstein, and they said, hey, we want some of that money from our own monsters.
Yeah.
And they had been trying to do a Creature from the Black Lagoon remake since about 82, and that still hasn't happened.
Yeah, that. I keep hearing that. It's like development hell, that one.
Yeah, there was like John Landis was producing one, and then John Carpenter was going to direct one, and then they approached Peter Jackson, and then they went through a phase in like the 2000s where it was being worked on continuously, and they got killed by the writer's strike, and all these things, and now they keep churning out new scripts, and it's supposed to be part of the new universe. Which I should mention, they have said that the solo monster movies are going to be pretty standalone.
Right, okay.
Which is a good move.
Yeah, I think if you connect them too much, you'll just alienate people.
Well, I mean, especially with Creature from the Black Lagoon, because how the hell are you going to justify him leaving the Amazon?
Yeah.
I mean, Monster Squad made it work, but that's Shane Black and Fred Decker, man. By the way, Monster Squad is awesome. But yeah, it started out, they decided they wanted to do The Mummy because I guess the Dracula remake it's already been worked on or something, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But the first kind of version they did is, according to this Fangoria article I have scanned, which came out around the time as the Sommers movie, is that it started out in like 87 or 88, and they approached a writer who's Abby Bernstein, who became a contributor for Fangoria. And the producer who was working on it at the time, the brief she was given was The Terminator only with a mummy. And they wanted the mummy to get up on page 1 and start killing people.
That's the wrong way to go about it.
And she said the fastest she could get it was on page 4, and they decided that was too fast. So
What?
it gets up on page 15.
Wow. I mean, that's a complete mood swing of a brief there.
I guess they decided when they saw the version where it gets up on page 4, they decided that the idea didn't work.
Well, no shit, I could have told them that before they paid for the fucking script.
Well, in Hollywood, you fail upwards. Look at John Peters.
Yeah. Hollywood, call me. When you want to make a decision, call me and I'll tell you you're a fucking idiot.
I wish I could get paid to call people a fucking idiot over the phone.
That would be the dream job.
No, the dream job for me would be reading scripts for a living.
Yeah.
So yeah, the storyline that she came up with was because she looked at the Terminator as a vague reference, because, that's what she was told to work with. And she came up with the idea that, how the Terminator, it's chasing down these people, but there's this big apocalyptic thing behind it.
Yeah.
And how she basically came up with the idea that the mummy, instead of coming from the future, it comes from the past, and it's trying to bring about the end of the world by this thing called the Tear of Sekhmet, which was this goddess who was set in mythology, was set to destroy humanity, but then the gods decided that's not such a good thing. She was supposed to like tame them and humble them, but then she tried to destroy all of them with her bloodlust. And so the gods got her drunk by a lake full of beer and then pacified her.
Wow. Egyptians were doing the date rape long before the Greeks got there.
Long before Bill Cosby got there, if you want to be topical.
Wow. Okay.
Controversy.
Yeah. Let's continue.
But the idea she had for the story was that she came up with this concept of this particular item called the Tear of Sekhmet, which, if dropped in the ocean, would eventually spread throughout the world and throughout, the water cycle and eventually kill all life on Earth.
Right.
And that this apocalyptic cult of Sekhmet was eventually stopped. And that this priestess Sekhmet is unearthed in modern times and is buried with the tear. And one group is studying the tear and one group is studying the mummy, and one of them decides to stick this, okay, let me read this because it's really weird. They have made a device intended to stimulate nerves in the brain to move limbs that are not working, because it's like quadriplegic study.
Right.
Which is going on in the same lab. And they try it out on the mummy just to see what happens, and that reanimates it.
So they put electrodes in a non-existent brain because it's not there anymore, because it's a fucking mummy, to stimulate muscles that are jerky. Literally. What the fuck?
Yeah, it is pretty stupid. But I mean, considering the brief for the story, I can't blame her. And it almost seems like a misguided homage to Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, where the long dead and desiccated corpse, they put a brain scan machine on it for some reason. I mean, it serves no purpose in the course of the movie, other than that you can see the blip on the machine.
Right.
And so you have people at the other part of the lab who are examining the tear, and they eventually figure out what's going on, and the mummy, because it has a psychic connection to this thing, and it starts chasing them down, trying to get the tear back.
Right, okay.
And, okay, I have to read this part out verbatim because it's so silly. To make things a bit more colorful, the mummy is slowly losing its wrappings, so it rewraps itself with whatever's handy. Barbed wire, phone cable, chain mesh, anything it can find. Quote, I had to scroll up. It sort of looked like a skeleton with 20th century wrappings. That is fucking stupid.
What? What?
Yeah.
No. What? That doesn't make any sense. That's not what the wrappings are there for. They're not decoration.
Well, it's gotta hold itself together.
But, I don't know. I can't do anything with that.
You don't even, do you?
No. No. Oh, God, that's terrible.
And, okay, so this writer, Abby Bernstein, she had a phone conversation with George Romero that went well, but he didn't like the direction the project was going in. So he walked away, and then she basically hears nothing back until this next writer gets the job. And so, yeah, I guess we're all kind of glad this movie didn't happen.
Yeah.
Like, it probably would have been hilarious and like a guilty, but it would have been MST3K fodder.
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, just the fact that stimulating a brain that literally isn't there.
Because they pulled it out through the nose.
Yeah, it's a mummy. That's what everyone knows, that there is no organs.
I mean, unless they just...
That would be like giving the guy a pacemaker.
I mean, unless he was like wrapped up alive or something like Imhotep.
I guess, but they don't explain that.
I'd have to read the script to know, but it is very silly.
But even then, he's still centuries old.
His brain would be mush.
Not even mush, dust.
And so, we move on to the next phase of the project, which is the script I'd most like to read. But it's not out there, sadly. Clive Barker had become something of an overnight success with Hellraiser, and he was working on Nightbreed at this time. And so Universal went, okay, let's... presumably this is before Nightbreed came out and bombed.
Yeah.
They signed on Clive Barker to direct their Mummy...
Out of curiosity, was this before Hellraiser 2?
It would have been after, because this is like 1990.
Okay.
Because he didn't actually make Hellraiser 2, remember?
No, but he had some input, and he was on set and stuff, so...
Yes, and this is after those initial sort of story conferences for Hellraiser 3 before it... Nowhere. And it's actually believed that because he had one of his first ideas for Hellraiser 3 was this Egyptian theme. And it's kind of... And there's some speculation that maybe those ideas filtered onto this project.
Okay.
And so, interestingly enough, Clive Barker elected not to write it himself. And he brought in Mick Garris, who at the time had mainly done behind-the-scenes stuff. And he had co-written The Fly 2.
Oh, God.
And he went on to become known as the guy who did almost every Stephen King miniseries ever. He also created Masters of Horror.
Oh.
Well, alright, so Mick Garris was writing the script with Clive Barker sitting in and, like, helping to shape it. And this is where it gets really weird. I'm going to read the quotes in the Fangoria article first, because this is the more sane stuff. Okay, it's like, this is a Garris quote. He says, "In a way, it was a little like Clive Barker meets Eric Von Daniken. The mummy itself is a suspended animation creature from long ago and far away, with alien protectors that come to life. It is housed in a brand new museum built in the heart of Beverly Hills. The grand opening night ceremony is greeted with the meltdown, eruption, and release of these creatures from beyond our planet. Clive Barker's The Mummy was alone in the string of unfilmed scripts and not containing a walking mummy at all. There was a mummy that was actually wrapped about what was underneath," Garris explains, rather arachnid-like intelligent creature. Dry director shrugs, "I thought at the time that I could not imagine a major studio doing this kind of movie, and I was right. Clive was very happy with the script and said, well, one thing I know, we got the right writer, and that just tickled me. It was really great to hear that sort of thing from someone I admired so much. But I guess he was the only one who thought so at the time. It just died."
That is terrible.
Really?
That sounds awful.
You don't like the Hellraiser take on the Mummy?
That's not really Hellraiser. That's more Crystal Skull.
Lovecraft.
It's not even Lovecraft, because it's like, it's too standard to be Lovecraft. It just sounds like, oh, we need to do something new. Let's make it aliens. Bang.
Okay, now let's, I'm going to read the Clive Barker quote that I have, and...
Oh, God.
Okay, this is long, so I might end up paraphrasing it, but looking back, our version of The Mummy was precisely what the powers that were at Universal did not want. It made the Mummy story over for the late 20th century, not in terms of its effects. This was before CGI brought dubious gifts to the process of horror filmmaking, close parentheses. But in terms of content, we had one particular narrative hook that we were very proud of. In the first scene, a strange boy child is born under circumstances, bracket, high howling winds and a ferocious thunderstorm, close bracket, that suggests something unnatural is afoot. The narrative then jumps 20 years or so. I almost put an extra word there, and we pick up the story of how sacred Egyptian artifacts are being brought to America for an exhibition that would put the Tutankhamun expedition to shame. An uncommonly beautiful woman is threaded into this action, a seducer and murderer of mysterious origin. Of the boy child, brackets, now presumably grown to adulthood, close brackets, we get no sight. Meanwhile, our anti-heroine is seducing her way through the male members of the cast, only to be revealed in the third act, spoiler, as the boy child, now turned, open bracket, thanks to surgery and hormones, close bracket, into a woman.
What? What? No. What? That's stupid.
We loved the idea so much so that we put the mystery surrounding this ambiguous creature and her extraordinary secret at the heart of our story. Our creation was not welcome at Universal, needless to say. The script, which Mick had labored hard over, working a diminutive, blah blah blah, skip that part, was eviscerated by the script readers and our producers. How could we expect to get away with something so weird? Nobody in America, we were told, would accept such a ridiculous premise. A few years later, Miramax made a huge hit out of a little movie called The Crying Game, which, if you remember, had a girl who has a few inches more than a girl and got naked to prove it. It was later in Stargate. I sent the receipts of The Crying... I added that part. I sent the receipts of The Crying Game over to the folks who rejected our perverted, their word version of The Mummy every week. I doubt they saw the irony.
No, I mean, basically, right, they went to Clive Barker and said, make us a Mummy script. And he comes back and says, here's a script about a transsexual. That's what I can get from that. Because he didn't mention anything supernatural there. It's just a transsexual woman.
Tumblr would love it.
Oh, Jesus.
I'd love to read the script.
Yeah.
Just to see how all these weird aliens and... Because he also talks about this idea of, the Egyptian gods coming to life in the modern world, in other quotes. I'd just love to see how that all fits together.
I can tell you, probably badly.
So you think it's more, bad Barker than good Barker?
It's Scarlet Gospels Barker.
I've not read that.
Yeah.
You think
just take my word for it, yeah.
It's shit?
Yeah. I digress.
Ooh, I've been meaning to read that. But yeah, it just sounds odd.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's aliens, it's a transsexual for no reason. Not that I'm saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying it's a bit of an odd choice.
And it has literally nothing to do with the movie.
No, it has nothing to do with anything. It's just there to be shocking, if anything else, which some would argue is kind of Barker's thing.
Yeah, that is his thing. He does like to shock. That sounds like they got really high and wrote a script.
Yeah.
Like, I'd still love to read it just to see how batshit crazy it actually is.
Maybe. But yeah, that's such a bizarre choice. That makes no sense. But yeah, that's interesting.
That more or less leads us into our first script where... And so they ended up talking to Joe Dante to do it, and Joe Dante is a big fan of all these Universal monsters and whatnot, so... So he came on to do it, and they got Alan Ormsby to write a draft based on his previous work he's done. He directed and wrote a movie I haven't seen called Deranged, and I mainly want to see it because it's one of those pseudo-Ed Gein movies, right. And it's starring the snow shovel man from Home Alone as the serial killer.
Oh.
Which
wow.
I have to see that eventually. And he also wrote the Cat People remake, which is an interesting, if not perfect, take on that material. It gets kind of lost in Paul Schrader showing off the pretty landscapes of New Orleans.
Okay.
And it severely underuses Malcolm McDowell, who is genuinely awesome and not phoning it in that movie.
A rare treat.
and also has the dad from Home Alone. I'll just leave that there.
Fair enough.
And Annette O'Toole, who ties into the Stephen King miniseries thing, and oh god, I've gone cross-eyed.
Yeah.
But they hired Alan Ormsby, and Joe Dante felt that the script wasn't quite there, so he called up John Sayles, who's a fairly noted writer whom he had worked with before on Piranha and The Howling, and who also was a filmmaker in his own right. Basically, he would do a lot of rewrite work for studios and would finance his own independent stuff from that money. And he also wrote a draft of Jurassic Park 4, which has a raptor SWAT team getting controlled by a Bond villain type character and attacking a drug lord in South America.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's a real script. I look forward to covering that one.
Fair enough.
Sounds like it might be the story of the sequel to Jurassic World, to be honest.
Yeah.
But so yeah, that leads to the script we have here, which is the John Sayles rewrite of the Alan Ormsby, dated November of 93. And the story summary here is that you have a group of archaeologists went and they dug up the tomb of the Princess Ankhsenamen, who is also a priestess of Isis. And while they're in the tomb, they find sealed within the wall this mysterious nameless mummy who was not properly mummified, but wrapped in sheepskin. And connected to the expedition was, 30 years before, there was an expedition to this same desert where the tomb was initially discovered by a archaeologist named Grover, and him and his wife were killed in this outbreak of Nile fever, and they were survived by their daughter Helen, who has sworn off all this stuff and has become a lawyer, but she gets talked into attending the opening of this special wing of the museum where all the artifacts have been taken because it's part of this charity thing.
It should be said as well that when the character Helen is a child, it's implied even then that she's some kind of reincarnation.
Yes, she's the reincarnation of the princess. It's not confirmed until later on, but you know that fairly early. But the presentation of that's going on in the auditorium sort of starts, having an effect on her, and she wanders off and ends up in the exhibit, and she ends up, and it ends up having an effect on her, and she whispers the name Imhotep under her breath, which causes an earthquake to happen, which is kind of supernatural in origin, and the nameless mummy crashes through the glass, and they take it to the hospital to make sure it's not, to MRI it, to make sure it's not been badly damaged, and that's where it comes to life, and it makes its journey throughout, the modern day Los Angeles, sort of sucking the life out of people to restore himself to his youth, and then he goes to see...
One thing I did like is that they used the kind of the white bird with a human face quite effectively. Yes. I like that. It was kind of creepy and weird.
Yeah, they use the different Egyptian... They use two of the different Egyptian aspects of the soul. They don't go into all of them because there's like a half a dozen.
Yeah, but you can tell they did a lot. They did actually quite a good bit of research, actually.
Oh yeah, this whole thing is very well researched in terms of the Egyptian stuff. Except for one little thing I'll get to.
I'm pretty sure if it's not the same thing as me, then I have something else as well.
Is it a translation?
Possibly, yeah.
The name? That's exactly what I was thinking. But it maybe does the research a little too much because we get the lecture, which is practically Egyptology 101.
Yeah, that's something else I was going to say, is that they were also a bit too proud of their research. That they just wanted to show it off.
Yeah, this thing has a problem with that. In the first 15 pages, it crams exposition in really quickly.
Yeah.
But I mean, so you have him restoring himself and chasing after his lost love, who is, I like how she's portrayed here as basically feeling like she's going insane because of all these reincarnations that she's gone through, that the personalities are almost impinging upon her. And she has kind of I like how the romance is played here because it's very kind of subtle, very first date romance.
Between her and Imhotep?
Between her and the Egyptologist.
Oh, right, sorry, yeah.
Yes,
you're right.
Mike Krasinski, whom, it's not the script's fault, but I kept wanting to read that as Mike Wazowski. From Monsters, Inc.
Yeah.
That's really the story. It's Imhotep kind of preying on her and wanting to bring his love back. It's kind of,
in a way, it's kind of similar to Coppola's Dracula.
Yes, because Coppola's Dracula basically stole its entire plot from The Mummy.
Yeah.
Because that's very much like what the original is about. It's very much about him trying to reacquire his lost love. And it's about how his love was so intense that losing her drove him completely insane. And then the process of, getting mummified alive made it even worse. And honestly, I actually think this is a really good update. It's got some problems here and there and could maybe use a little bit more definition to it.
Yeah.
And it has one of those endings where there's a loose end where it's like, yeah, they're gonna go to prison.
Yeah.
And I think we can go through it, not necessarily point by point, but we can talk about, the different things about it in general. Because this plot, what's interesting about this plot is that it's relatively simplistic, almost to the point where it feels very sort of minimal.
Yeah, I would definitely say that as well. It is very minimal on, not so much on the details of what's going on, but just details of plot. It's very basic.
Yeah, it's very basic, and that's not a bad thing.
No, it's just, I don't know, it feels odd.
It does feel odd, and I think it would depend on how it's directed.
Yeah, I think that's something else as well, because there is a lot of, you'd need to build atmosphere, I think.
And I feel like there is an atmosphere here, it's just not quite there on the page.
Yeah, the atmosphere is definitely not on the page. It would have to be, that's the director's job, really.
But I mean, there were definitely some scenes in this I could very easily picture in my head. My favorite one being just the restored Imhotep just kind of drifting along down the street.
Oh yeah, I could not imagine that. But again, I did imagine it as Arnold Vosloo because I can't see anyone else playing that character.
You see, I didn't necessarily imagine him as Arnold Vosloo because I have the background with Boris Karloff.
Yeah, of course.
And I know that Joe Dante's choice for Imhotep was Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah.
Which, even if the movie wasn't good, he would have been amazing.
Yeah, he would have gone balls to the wall.
Because, I mean, even in movies that aren't that great, he's still great.
Yeah.
Like, Gangs of New York, not a terribly good movie, but he steals every scene he's in.
Plus, it'd be funny to see him wandering around the set in Method.
Oh, I could totally see himself wrapping himself in bandages and just laying it.
Yeah. I want to be mummified. I need to get into character.
And because they make a big deal about them speaking his name, because taking away the name took away your soul, basically, your afterlife.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining the ending of The Crucible where he's like, because it is my name.
Yeah.
And this was around the time, would have been right after Last of the Mohicans, so he would have been in, like, the best shape of his life.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, one of the greatest movies ever made.
Indeed.
But, yes, and Wes Studi, amazing villain. To get back on topic, it opens in an interesting way because it doesn't open with a big, historical flashback.
No, yeah, it very much starts, not so much focusing on the bad guy.
No, it starts with Helen as a little girl in her oversized pith helmet.
Yeah, I don't know why they point that out.
Because I think it's just trying to be cute. And to show, like, her kind of childish enthusiasm, which is kind of dulled.
I guess.
Yeah, but, I mean, it opens with her and her parents visiting, the site in Egypt where they would eventually dig up the palace and the tomb, and it got sealed off later on because of the deaths.
Yeah.
And I like that moment because it's one of the most atmospheric moments in the script where she's sitting on the rise of the hill saying, I used to live here. And the father says, what do you mean? And she says, I don't know. It feels very natural, and the idea that he dug on that spot, it's because of her precognition, I guess you'd call it, or retrocognition.
Yeah, it's and that kind of story, you can kind of imagine that actually happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was all quite believable and quite subtle as well. They didn't go completely mental with the spiritual bollocks at the beginning.
And the whole reincarnation thing in this, while I do think they overemphasize it slightly,
near the end it gets a bit overemphasized.
This is one of the very few times I've seen a reincarnation story which doesn't leave you with a million fucking questions about who the person actually is in their brain. Yeah,
it does explain it quite well.
It differentiates between the personalities and makes sense how she could have been in love with Imhotep in the past, but kind of forming a relationship with this guy in the present. And I like the fact that her other sort of incarnations are also touched on in this briefly.
Yeah. They don't specifically say who they are or anything, but they are mentioned.
They do specify one, but I like the fact that they don't overemphasize it. Mm-hmm. And I like the bits where Imhotep is encountering her and he's like morphing her face to all the different ones.
Yeah, trying to find the original.
If anything, it's in the moments where they do specify certain things where it just kind of feels tacked on. Yeah. Like, there's a moment where she's doing, like, her lawyer activities and she suddenly speaks Spanish.
I kind of like that, honestly, because it was subtle, like I said. It was, because I could see that, the way that would play out is that you'd see the woman speak Spanish, she would reply in English, as it's shown in the script, and the Spanish person, she says in the script, I didn't know you speak Spanish, and she's like, I don't. The way it's done, it would be like, what the hell just happened? That was kind of odd.
Yeah, but it's not. Yeah, but it's not really touched on, is the thing.
I grant you that. If it would have been done at least another time, I think it would have been better.
But it just seems kind of random, and they do touch on it once later on, where she's walking down the street in a daze, and she sees a piano in a shop window. And she goes to play it, even though she doesn't know how to play piano. And the shopkeeper says, "Oh, it belonged to this person."
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was like implying that's who she was or something.
I think that's what was supposed to do, and that's a scene you could easily cut.
Yeah, and apparently all her past lives are converging in one city.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting.
Very not really necessary, because it was just re-emphasizing a fact we were already being emphasized.
Yeah, that's true, but I don't... Yeah, it's a scene I didn't really need.
Hmm.
And so as it goes on, it cuts to, the 1990s, which is weird, because it says 1963 is when that scene takes place, and she's 7. And 1993 is when the rest of this takes place. That means she was 37. Which, that just feels older than she feels in the script, I think.
Yeah. It's... I'm not sure, really. I think it would make sense because, it's not too young to be, because she's like a successful lawyer and all that.
Yeah.
So I think they were going for that as well. So I don't know.
Yeah, and her whole thing with, the whole successful lawyer thing, I have to mention, you get one of those annoying things where they go like, she's the best lawyer in this firm, and you don't really get any evidence of that.
Yeah. They just, that's a tell, don't show, apparently.
But okay, the whole... She ends up going to the museum, and the whole thing has been set up by Oxford archaeologist, Egyptologist John Norton, who would have been played by Christopher Lee. And Joe Dante confirms that in the interview, and I was thinking Christopher Lee when I first read this, too.
Interesting.
Because I knew him and Joe Dante had a working relationship based off of Gremlins 2.
Right.
Where Christopher Lee actually apologized to Joe Dante for making Howling 2.
I would say so, Christopher, yes.
I'm like, dude, you should apologize to the audience.
Yes.
But anyway. But there she meets, Mike Krasinski. I'm gonna say Wazowski at least once. But he was an Egyptologist who was part of the expedition, and he split with them over, philosophical differences. He wanted to remain in the ground, and so he left. And that ends up, really, that's not that important. It just becomes a reason for the cops to be suspicious of him later.
Honestly, I honestly thought, and this might actually happen, I might be forgetting something on the script, but I honestly thought he's going to come back to be like the protector of the tomb or something.
No, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I genuinely thought that's where they were going with it, but it just didn't do anything.
Oh, so he was going to become Rick in the second movie.
Yeah. Or he's our Death Bay, basically.
He's the Magi Messiah.
Yeah.
Granted, he does earn it more than Rick does, but...
True.
Because Rick just kind of goes, hey, I got a tattoo.
Yeah, that's true. He actually bothers to do stuff.
But no, she meets him there, and they go into the lecture mode. And what's interesting is that they show a picture of Ankhsenamon's tomb, and it's like a pyramid with the top cut off, which I didn't pick up on my first reading, but that's foreshadowing the big ridiculous pyramid at the end.
Oh, yeah. Wow. I just got that too.
But no, and you get the whole spiel about how they found Imhotep's sarcophagus sealed within the walls because he wasn't properly treated and there was fungus all over the place, which is just making me think of amnesia.
Yeah.
And of course, this sets off something in her brain and starts awakening her incarnations, basically. And so she wanders off into the exhibit and she walks and she finds, the sheepskin mummy, and she is remembering her past life subconsciously and whispers Imhotep without even realizing it.
Which is apparently enough to start the resurrection process or something.
Yes, because in Egyptian spirituality, the name was everything. Restoring the name is what starts it off. And so there's a supernatural tremor, which is the supernaturalness of it is kind of But it's one of those things, it's because it's not really explained.
Well, I kind of assumed it was supernatural.
Yeah, because they say, later on they say, the seismographer didn't pick it up or something.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure it would be.
And the mummy ends up crashing through the glass. And so Norton decides they have to take it off to the university hospital to examine it with an MRI machine. And Mike bums a ride off of Helen because his motorcycle is apparently messed up. And it's really just his excuse to ask her out. But.
Pretty much.
And so while that's going on, at the hospital, they're scanning the mummy, and Norton finds there's like a heart scarab over its chest. And he reads the inscription, and that sort of finishes the process.
Yeah.
And then the Egyptian soul, which is the bobird, the falcon with the human face, flies around, and it's mentioned that the mummy is not a regular mummy, it's wrapped in sheepskin. And there actually is a real sheepskin mummy.
Oh, really?
And it's speculated as to what that actually meant, and it was speculated that he was in fact mummified alive. But they don't think that anymore because what made them think that was the expression on its face. But they've discovered that sort of thing can be found on any mummy.
Ooh.
Because its head will fall back after rigor mortis goes away.
Yeah, head would fall back, mouth opens. Ugh, still creepy though.
Yes, and so it tears open the sheepskin and tears open the bindings on its hands and starts attacking Norton and basically drives it into the mummy, who grabs his arm and then absorbs his ka, which is the ancient Egyptian life force. And there's actually a moment later on where he absorbs ka from someone else, and you see it as like a glowing light in his hand.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, and so this is honestly a really creepy scene, the way it's kind of described, because he backs into the mummy and it grabs his shoulder. And it gets up and puts on the guy's clothes, so Christopher Lee is dead. Yeah,
kind of a waste of Christopher Lee, frankly.
Yeah, it would have been an interesting cameo, but still. And so it's walking around, at this point it's like a 90-year-old man, and it's walking around in the hospital. There's this weird moment where it goes into the emergency room and is seeing the ghosts of the recently dead.
Oh yeah, that was kind of random.
And I don't know how I feel about that. That seems like kind of magical powers it doesn't need.
Yeah, and plus the fact that it just doesn't do it again.
Yeah, it's kind of odd, but I like the idea of him sort of waking up in this very chaotic place and having to kind of take it all in.
Yeah. It's just that the ghost was a bit overkill, really.
Yeah, it was overkill, and I like how he walks out into the street, and he's just wandering around, just kind of figuring this place out, and yet he looks at the walk, don't walk signs, and that kind of, he relates to that, because it's pictograms, like the...
Yeah, I thought that was quite clever. Because he thinks to himself, at least they still use pictograms.
Yeah, I like that. It relates to the hieroglyphs, and he keeps wandering. He wanders into a 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
And he absorbs from one of the clerks, which I was thinking Apu while reading this. And they get more Apu-like in the subsequent drafts.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so he sucks from that guy, he sucks from a street punk, and then he sucks the life out of a prostitute. And so he's now fully regenerated, and then the next morning it cuts between Mike and Helen on their little quirky date, getting Philly cheesesteak on the pier at Venice Beach.
That's one thing as well. I did think it was a bit I know it's like in the original.
A little bit.
But I did think he regenerated fully a bit too quickly for me.
You think so?
Yeah, it's just my personal opinion.
Well, in the original, you don't see him regenerate.
Yeah, and that's why I think they did it that way. But like I said, I'm more used to the 99 version, whereas yours...
Yeah, where it takes forever to regenerate.
Yeah, so I think that's where we got the different opinions on this one.
And he goes and gets to go for specific people there.
Yeah.
But, I mean, this is reasonable considering, the 1999 movie didn't exist, and so they're just kind of extrapolating from the original film.
Mm.
And so they're going on their date talking about reincarnation and stuff, and there's like this guy who can see all her incarnations and stuff, which was kind of amusing because you think he's full of shit, and then it's like he actually does know something.
Yeah.
And they set up this thing that's foreshadowing for way later about some sort of solar alignment.
Yeah, but even then, it's not really expanded upon much.
No, like, it's one of those things where you could almost forget about this moment if it happened.
Yeah.
And I'll say now, here's a problem I have with this script, is that they move really quickly to get Imhotep up and walking around.
Yeah.
Because it's like, all the setup is 15 pages, 15 more pages, he's up, 10 pages, he's regenerated. That's a little weird. I do have an issue with that.
Right, yeah.
And so while that whole scene is going on, he is wandering up Melrose Avenue. And that's an interesting point because Stephen Sommers, I know he read this draft because he said he read one of the drafts. He said, he's like walking up Melrose Avenue and hanging with the surfers and stuff. He's like, it was good, but it wasn't the Mummy. And I'm like, bullshit, Stephen.
I mean, it didn't feel out of place to me. It made sense. I mean, what else was he supposed to fucking do?
Yes, and during the date scene, I should mention before we do the Imhotep stuff.
Yeah.
There's one thing Stephen Sommers picked up from here, and that's that Mike has multiple religious symbols around his neck.
Oh, yeah, he totally used that for Benny.
Yeah, he has the Blue Stone Ankh, and he has the Star of David, which according to him means he never has to pay retail. Which was kind of funny.
Yeah.
And the Jewish thing is actually kind of funny because Imhotep refers to him as slave several times because of it. Which I thought was a nice little historical in-joke.
Yeah, but, I mean, there's a similar moment in the actual film, doesn't he? When he hears Hebrew.
Yeah, and he goes, the language of the slaves.
Yeah.
Which you said in the review of Benny was speaking Jewish.
Yeah, but I'm not Jewish, so that's my excuse.
That's funny. But no, this ties into the next moment where Imhotep is walking down the street, and he hears Hebrew being spoken, which is the only language he understands here.
Yeah.
Which, granted, is kind of bullshit because the language would have changed a shitload over 3,000 years.
Plus the fact that they would be saying words he wouldn't be familiar with as well.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
It's bullshit, but it's workable enough that I can swallow it.
Yeah. It's just a hair's breadth believable.
Yeah, and he walks into the Hebrew school, and he starts talking with the rabbi. And I really like this scene, because it just kind of shows his whole wonder at this world.
Yeah, I liked it as well, is that he wasn't just going around killing people. He's genuinely trying to learn as well.
Yeah, he has a hunger for knowledge about this world, and just, he tries to go through the entire library, and then he draws his magic from the sun to just suck all the energy out, and you can hear these swirling voices in different languages as he's learning. And the rabbi is just generally in awe of this figure. Yeah,
and then he looks and like all the books are now completely empty.
Yeah, they're all blank, and he sees a poster for the exhibit on the wall, and so he knows to go back to the museum.
It's a really good scene, actually, and I would have liked to have seen something similar for the Arnold Vosloo version.
Yes, that would have been cool instead of just Benny being a twerp.
Yeah, because I think I said it before that in the 1990 version is 99 version rather. Imhotep is a bit too psychotic.
But yeah, I will admit, I do get a good laugh every time I watch it out of Benny with every single religious symbol around his neck.
Yeah.
Like that's just the funniest thing ever. Just like he has a little Buddha, he has a Kashiva, he has the Star of David, he has the cross, he has a few others.
And what I think is even funnier is the fact that he knows all the languages, all the prayers that go with them. He's actually taken the time to learn that.
I guess he's been all over the world and has conned a lot of people.
Mm.
Although he's not really that smart, so...
Yeah, it's kind of disconnection there, actually.
But to get back to the script, yeah, Imhotep, because what happens is that... Oh, no, what happens, actually? Hold on, I'm scrolling.
After the...
After the Hebrew scene.
After the Hebrew scene, he kind of goes off for a bit, doesn't he? He disappears.
Yeah.
And then it's like more stuff with her in her apartment.
Yeah, okay, what happens is that Mike got called to go talk to Norton about the mummy.
Yeah.
Norton called up the night before, and so he goes to drop in, and he finds that Norton is missing, and there's only the shriveled body there, which they think is the mummy, and then he points out the golden crowns on the teeth.
Yes.
And he just suggests on a hunch to check it against Norton's dental records.
Which they take an excruciatingly long time to do.
Yes, they do. I mean, that's bureaucracy for you, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they show him the footage of Helen wandering through the exhibit, and he reads her lips to see her saying Imhotep.
Mm.
Excuse me.
And see, again, he recognizes the name, and again, I thought this was setting up the fact that he was like some kind of protector.
You're thinking Odette Fair.
Yeah.
This goofy guy who lives in Venice Beach and has like a Michael Jordan poster?
Yeah. Because it was like set up to be like he protested them taking the stuff and all this, and
yeah, that is true, but
it would have been a good disguise, let's be honest.
Yeah. And so he does that. He goes to visit her at her apartment, and he tells her about what he saw in the videotape, and he mentions that Imhotep, they found that there was a name that was scratched out on every wall, but they found one where it was just painted over, and they were able to reconstruct the name.
Mm.
But it was saying that it was kept out of all the brochures and all the exhibits, and only Norton and Rosinski knew this name.
Right, yeah.
And while they're discussing it, she gets up as if she was under, like, hypnosis. Because while this is going on, Imhotep has gone back to the museum, and he gets past the security guard by, his necklace has a scarab on it, and he brings that scarab to life, and it goes to the guard, and, like, I think it goes into his hand at this point.
Yeah, it basically does the exact same thing as it does in the film, except in the film it goes into his head and not his chest.
Here it goes into his chest and then bursts out.
Which I think actually is more accurate because the whole thing about them thinking that the soul is in the heart and not the head.
Yes.
So it kind of makes more sense doing it that way.
And it makes more sense because he's magically bringing it to life, and it's not just a random jewel that hatches a scarab.
Yeah. Which doesn't... Yeah, it's kind of weird how it just happens. But, if I may, just digress a little bit, I think the scarab doing that is kind of... makes it seem more like Hamunaptra was mystical in nature and magical, but regardless, that's...
It's still a little random.
It is.
And so, yeah, so Imhotep is there, and he also, while he's there, he also kills, the woman who's in charge of the benefit by sucking her Ka out, and that's when you see him holding the life force in his hand. And so he's chanting over Ankhsenamon's body, and that's what draws Helen to the museum and to him. Now, that's a scene similar to the original movie where he's trying to resurrect the body, and he doesn't realize the soul's been reincarnated yet.
Right.
And so she tries to come to him, but it plays out a little differently. So she comes to him. He kind of gets the idea of what's going on, and that's when he, like, phases her through all her different reincarnations.
Mm.
But then Mike, who follows her there, he sort of, like, overcomes Imhotep by using his Ankh necklace. And he also sets off the fire alarm, which distracts Imhotep with the water, and then he grabs her and runs off.
It did both make me think of Van Helsing vs. Dracula, because he holds it like a cross.
Yeah.
And it also made me think of Hocus Pocus, because he does the same thing with the sprinkler.
But yeah, it's also, well, that's one of the things that's often talked about with the original Mummy, is because it had the same screenwriter as Dracula.
Mm.
It's implied that he kind of had the same ideas on the brain and reused some of them. Because instead of an Ankh in the original movie, it's like a little statuette of Isis.
Right, okay. I mean, that would make it less obvious.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, the only difference between an Ankh and a cross is a little circle at the top.
And then, of course, they both get arrested, and brought in for questioning, but of course the cops have absolutely nothing on these two.
Yeah.
And so they get released, and because she's seeing like her reincarnations in the mirror and stuff, and she thinks she's going crazy, because she's walking off and not remembering it, she has him stay over at her place for her own peace of mind. And then while she's there, Imhotep tries to like contact the Oxynomen part of her, I think. Now this part's weird. It
was kind of similar to how it's done in the 99 version.
Sort of, where he's like making love to her spirit.
Yeah, it's a bit
and that
odd,
causes her to wake up and try to make love to Mike, who sees the Egyptian face on her and goes, "Whoa!" And of course that cock blocks Imhotep, which pisses him off.
Yeah, it's like it kind of reminded me of the scene in Ghostbusters.
Yes, exactly.
You know?
Where it's like she sleeps 5 feet above her covers.
Yeah, it was very similar to that.
And I believe there's a moment where he's like watching her from her bathroom mirror.
Yeah, but it's very ambiguous.
Which is really creepy. There's also a moment where the Bobbird is watching through the window and they can't see it. I do really like the Bobbird in this.
Yeah,
it's creepy.
It's clever and it's implemented well.
And I just like the idea they did that much research.
Yeah.
And the next morning, she goes to work, and Imhotep is on the beach, and he's using the sun to like enhance his magic, because, the Egyptians were all about the sun.
And apparently he's Superman.
Yes, I should have thought of that. He uses the sun to power his magic, and he does this weird little calisthenic dance where he tries to make Mike stab himself to death with a knife. And he eventually, I think it's because he gets the Ankh and he uses that to fight him off. Yeah, the cat, and Helen's cat scratches him, and that breaks the spell long enough for Mike to get the Ankh necklace back.
Yeah, the cat is weird as well.
Oh, the cat gets incredibly weird as this thing goes on.
Yeah, because it's like, is there something more to this, or is it just the cat? This is really weird.
I think that was Joe Dante's kind of Looney Tunes sensibility slipping in just a little bit.
Yeah, it felt like it.
And so, basically, Helen quits her job, realizing she's hated it all these years, and she wanders around in the haze, and that's when the piano scene happens. And then she gets drawn to the beach, and she sits down there with Imhotep, who is wearing a Speedo, which is another thing Stephen Sommers took.
Yeah.
And this is where we get the background. I like this scene because she is very much out of her mind, and it reminds me of the original movie, where he shows her their history in a pool.
Yeah.
And actually, part of the reason why I like the reincarnation stuff here is because originally in the film there was 2 scenes of them looking into the pool, and in the first one he shows her all her different past lives, and then the second scene he shows their backstory. But the past lives scene was cut completely from the film, and it's a lost scene, and there's only like still frames left of it.
Okay.
And so I find what they do here to be a nice sort of callback to that.
Yeah.
In fact, it was cut so late that one of the actors from one of those scenes is still credited in the opening credits.
Wow.
As the Saxon warrior. But here, instead of a pool, he's showing it to her in the ocean.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of gave it more, I think the word I used was gravitas.
Yeah, and it's just a cool visual.
It is, yeah. And you can kind of see it transition into that idea. I could really see it working out in the movie.
Yeah, it would have been really cool. And he explains the backstory, and I like the backstory because it's nice and tragic, and it's a little relatable. Yeah,
but it's also not too detailed as well. It's very, it's a very basic thing.
Yeah, it's very basic, and some of the rewrites get a little more complicated with it, but they still do interesting stuff. So now, so the story he tells is that he was a great general named Imhotep, and this is where the research fails, because they say Imhotep means Lance of the Sun.
Which is wrong completely.
It means the he who comes in peace.
Yeah, that's literally what it translates to.
Which is kind of funny that he's a general.
I know. I mean, that's why it made sense for him to be a priest in the 99 version, because, priest, peace, I guess makes sense.
And he was a high priest in the original.
Yeah, so it makes more sense that way.
Here he's a great general, and she's a princess and priestess of Isis, and they're in love, but but they're not allowed to be together. The pharaoh doesn't approve of their love, basically.
Yeah.
And so he knows because, they'll be separated not only in this life, but the next, because that's how the Egyptian afterlife works.
Yeah.
He goes so mad with despair that he makes a pact with Set, who's basically the Egyptian god of evil.
Basically Satan.
Basically Satan. He's a little more complex than that, but he is a raging asshole in the mythology.
Yeah.
Who tried to impregnate Horus, which doesn't make any sense, but ancient Egyptian shit. Horus catches Set's semen in his hand.
Lovely.
And so he sprinkles it on Set's favorite food, which is cabbages, and Set eats it, and he gives birth to a sun disk from his head.
Wow. Egyptian porn is weird.
And that's going to be the intro.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Yes. But so he makes this deal for immortality for both him and her. And there's a bit of a fuck up later on because this doesn't make any sense later. But before he can go to her with this good news, what he believes is out of despair for not being together, kills herself with a snake, Cleopatra style.
Yeah.
Which the TV show Rome recreates that and makes it not cheesy.
Tall order, actually, come to think of it.
They handled the Antony and Cleopatra stuff very well. It makes you feel bad for Antony, who is depicted as a raging asshole in that TV show.
Right.
But no, she died, and while they were mummifying her, he went crazy and just attacked the embalmers and shed blood in the temple, and that was considered a great blasphemy.
That's one thing I should say as well, is that I was quite surprised by, is that he just shows up at her being embalmed, and he just goes completely mental and just slices everyone up.
And so then they embalm him alive and then put him in the tomb.
But it is also said that he was actually immortal.
Yes.
So
it's a little, it could be explained a little better. But also, I find it interesting that none of these drafts actually do the thing from the original movie, because in the original movie, it's a little vague as to what his blasphemy actually is, whether it's stealing the scroll or if it's trying to resurrect her in the first place. Because he gets caught in the middle of resurrecting her, and because of this great crime, that's what gets them embalmed alive. Yeah,
and they don't point out how ludicrously stupid it is. Because the Homdai.
Well, that's only in the remake, and it's really stupid.
I know, but it's so stupid, isn't it? Because it's like, we're going to punish you by potentially making you an apocalyptic, immortal god. Why? What's the logic here? Let's turn the clocks back and change this a little bit, shall we?
Yeah, even as a kid, I was like, wait a minute, why would they do that?
Yeah.
And also, the plagues hadn't happened yet in that time frame.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no reason why he would use the plagues as any sort of, I don't know. It's weird.
It makes about as much sense as the Nazis thinking they can control the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
Controversial. You want to talk to God, Imhotep? Prepare to meet Set in hell. Sorry, I've been on an Indiana Jones kick lately.
I thought you were going to say something about him needing a starship.
No, that's Star Trek.
Yeah.
Interdimensional beings, as a matter of fact. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah. Oh, God. Too many references. Stop it.
But no, I like the backstory here. I would maybe have liked to have seen the resurrection thing come back, and that's something that Stephen Sommers did get right. Although he tries to resurrect her by stabbing her.
Yeah, that doesn't make much sense.
Because he said, stop stabbing things.
It was my fault.
Which we will get the chance to make that joke later. But no, he tells her this story, and then she gets snapped out of her reverie by Mike finding her, and she wakes up alone, and she's been there so long, the tide has come in. Which I can just imagine her just literally just sitting there for hours. That was really cool. That was a brilliant moment. Yeah. I do like how he doesn't even bother to mention the fact that he almost magically stabbed himself. Yeah, he just doesn't. He's like, it's kind of an alright day, actually. Yeah, that's right. They go back to her apartment, and then the generic cops and the FBI agent, and one who's just called the Tail because they've been tailing them. Oh, really? I thought, I totally missed that. I just thought that was his name. No, he's the Tail, and so they just call him Tail throughout this whole thing. I thought he would, Sonic's going to show up. And so what's happening during this point is that they go in there because they finally checked up on Mike's suggestion that they look at the teeth, the dental records, and they say, "Oh, how could you have known that was Norton? We're going to arrest you on the flimsiest of goddamn evidence."
Yeah, they really don't really have anything. It's just an excuse to kind of pad things out.
And then the scarab, which Imhotep had planted in there before, comes to life and it attacks one of the cops, and it goes into his foot this time. And they actually cut it out of his arm too. Like Jonathan in the movie.
Which you can tell is where he got it from.
Yeah, Stephen Sommers nicking ideas, damn it.
Yeah. But I mean, it was a good idea, even though they kind of messed it up with continuity.
Yeah, it works better here.
Yeah, they did it better here because it wasn't, because in the film, it was kind of played for laughs in a way.
Yeah, especially when it happens to Jonathan.
Yeah, so it's not that impactful.
Yeah, but it happens here, and it's almost ridiculous how destructive this scene gets because Helen slips out under Imhotep's influence. And then, and so what happens is that they cut it out of the one guy, and then it turns back into a stone, and the one cop shoots it. It splits into 6 parts, which then come to life as 6 scarabs. And then kill all 3 cops.
Yeah.
Which is just like, it's almost like you were almost safe, and then you fucked it up.
It's kind of weird though, because like the stone scarab turning into a scarab makes sense.
Yeah.
In certain ways, but the problem I had is that I couldn't picture the little pieces morphing into beetles. It just doesn't feel like it would work for me. Yeah,
it's a little weird. It's just an insanely destructive sequence.
Yeah, and it just goes a bit too far with it.
And all these dead cops in her apartment, never resolved.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's not going to be good for business, really.
And while all this shit is happening, okay, they eventually coalesce back into one scarab, and the cat eats.
With no problems with that either.
And while all this is happening, apparently Helen was just sitting in her car.
Mm.
And so they go down to the street, and the cat jumps into the car, and she drives off. And Mike is like, "Oh crap, what am I going to do?" And then he has to go figure out where she's going.
Mm.
And while all that was going on, the exhibit got all packed up, because the Egyptian government is like, Zahi Hawass got really pissed, I guess.
Yeah.
And then went like, "Okay, we're reclaiming all this shit, taking it back to Egypt." And so they pack it into army trucks, and instead of taking it to the airport to ship it out, they drive off into the desert.
Right, yeah. I'm not sure where they're going, though.
Yeah, are they going to like a military base or something?
I assume they need to get on a plane.
That's what I'm thinking, because I mean, you can't drive across the ocean no matter what Samurai Cop 2 would have you believe.
But I mean, isn't this in like Los Angeles?
Yeah.
So why are they going into the desert?
I don't know. Just go to, I guess LAX was too crowded, so they went to a military base.
It's so weird.
And also with them is the museum's head of security, Burns, who is totally the Dick Miller cameo.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that.
His best cameo is still in Determinate. You can't do that. Wrong. He's in the gun shop.
Oh, yes. I forgot. Yes.
It's like, hey, you can't do that. Wrong. Bam.
That's right.
Arnold tries to buy a laser gun.
Oh, yeah. That's a really classic line as well.
But no, while they're driving this stuff through the desert, Imhotep, like, controls the sand and blocks the road. And what's a really eerie scene, he's just standing there with his eyes glowing in the light. Which
would look really cool.
And you don't see what happens to them, but later on they're found and they're all desiccated like he sucked the car. And what he's doing while these pieces are all converging, he's building a big sand pyramid in the desert with an adobe crust, and the top is cut off like Akhenaten's tomb. And he's building it at this point where the light from a solar alignment is shining down. It's because he needs to draw his power from the sun, because he's Superman.
He is Superman. We've established that now.
And Mr. Burns could easily defeat him. And the one of the things I liked about the way this pyramid thing is described is that it shows the sunlight, like, gathering in through what would have been like air shafts.
Mm.
And they actually think that the so-called air shafts in the actual pyramids were supposed to symbolically draw the magic of the sunlight or something.
Yeah, I can see that.
Something like that in real life. So yeah, I like that's another piece of research.
Yeah, like I said, for the most part, they got their research down.
Except the name.
Which is, I mean, that has to be they basically just ignored it and just changed it.
I mean, unless it's something where if you read the hieroglyphics differently, because I know that can be a thing.
Yes, because sometimes you can read them from left to right, up, from bottom to top, from top to bottom, right to left. It's weird.
And because they're both pictographic and alphabetic.
Yeah, it's a very complicated language.
Just like Egyptian bureaucracy. Which seriously was incredibly complicated.
Yes.
But no, what happens is that he's building it on this specific site because he needs, I'm guessing it's because he needs the sun power to make the resurrection thing work. He needs that specific amount.
They don't mention that, but you could assume it.
Yeah, it's left to be inferred. And so Mike does, because he knows about the sunlight thing, he does his whole calculations, figures out where she's going. And so she gets there, walks into the pyramid. The cat follows her in here. He gets on his motorcycle and rides off, and I'm just imagining the motorcycle from Dumb and Dumber.
Ha, yeah.
Or the one from Grindhouse. It's a really tiny motorcycle.
Oh, right. I haven't seen Grindhouse in years.
Oh, yeah, I haven't either. I've only ever seen Planet Terror.
Oh, by the way, this is just something I just saw right now. Imhotep is an 85 video game about building pyramids.
Which, it makes sense, because the historical Imhotep was the architect of the Step
Pyramid. Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with the fictional character being named after him, because there have been plenty of Egyptians with the exact same name as each other.
Yeah, exactly. It's as if somebody named James. How many Jameses are there? Same
named
thing.
named in commemoration of the famous person.
Hmm.
Same goes for Ankhsenamen, who is historically Tutankhamun's queen. Barrett, and this makes complete sense because remember, there were 11 pharaohs named Ramses, so, dear God.
Yeah, they kind of needed a better writer.
So, she runs in there with her cat following, and what Imhotep does is that he basically powers through all her reincarnations and brings Ankhsenamen to the front. And she, physically transforms to the point where she's wearing Egyptian clothes. Which is kind of weird.
I'm not sure how that happened. Apparently, that's the past lives of her clothes as well.
And they're talking, and he's saying that what he means to do is that he wants to pluck that soul from the body and move it into her original body and then purge the rest.
Which seems like a bad idea, because her original body is jerky.
Yeah, he's gonna resurrect her, presumably.
Hopefully. You would hope so. He didn't do it in the movie. She just stayed jerky.
Yeah, he was perfectly fine with her.
Yeah.
Well, presumably if he sacrificed Evie, she would have fully resurrected, but then she was already reincarnated as What's-Her-Face, who shows up in the second movie. And oh god, I've gone cross-eyed.
Again. Which actually would uncross your eyes, so well done.
Yes. And I'm probably going to do it 5 more times over the course of this thing.
Yeah.
But then she reveals that he explains his plan, and she reveals that she didn't actually kill herself out of despair. She killed herself out of fear because he made a deal with the devil god, and now she feared what he had become. I don't really understand how that works, because according to Imhotep's story, she didn't know shit about what happened.
Yeah, it's weird. But I would say I prefer this than her just being a complete bitch.
That is true.
You know?
Which is what she turned out to be in The Mummy Returns.
Yeah, so in this version it actually gives a reason, instead of her just being, nope, fuck you, I'm out of here. And then falling into a pit.
It actually it could be explained a little bit better. That's one of my problems with this.
Yeah. But I think all it needed was another rewrite.
Yeah, one more rewrite and this would have been fixed.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have many problems with it if you just rewrote it a little bit and made it a little bit more concise.
But no, Mike traces his way there. He finds the big, ridiculous pyramid. He walks in, and in the antechamber, he finds all these items that have been laid out, including a sickle. And he picks it up, walks into the chamber, And he says, you better be careful, because my ancestors in Poland were dead with this thing, which I got a good laugh out of that.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I should say about this script, is that it does have its funny moments, but none of them come from Imhotep.
No. He's played completely straight.
And he's kind of terrifying in his omnipresence.
Which is good, which is the way it's supposed to be.
Especially when he's gazing through the mirror and, like, the bobber is looking through the window.
That old creepy stuff where it's like kind of mind manipulation is all well done.
And so, okay, this is where it gets really weird. The cat which ate the scarab pukes. It's in the pyramid I mentioned.
Yeah.
It pukes up the scarab, and then because Imhotep took all the different things from the exhibit from the trucks into this pyramid, and it crawls into the baboon mummy that was part of the experiment, the exhibition, not experiment.
Yeah, because they mention a load of mummified animals at the start.
And it brings the baboon mummy to life, and it fights Mike, and almost kills him.
Which is kind of a dick move on the cat's part.
But it's not the cat's fault, I don't think.
Well, that's just it. It kind of felt like it did it on purpose. Like, that's why it was there.
Imhotep well, I think it ate the scarab out of instinct.
I guess, but it was all implied like the cat was something different.
Because, I mean, have you ever seen a cat chase a bug around?
Yes.
It's actually quite hilarious and cute. But no, and then, I guess Imhotep made it vomit. I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird.
And then, so Mike's getting his ass kicked, and Ankhsenamen goes, I'm using my magic, bitch. She transforms the cat into a leopard.
Yeah.
Which then fucks up the baboon, and then fucks up the scarab. And then it transforms back into the cat.
Yeah.
Which is just weird. As he starts fighting Imhotep, and then they're like kind of like fighting back and forth with magic, and then she calls upon Isis to get her magic powers back, which is more or less what happens in the original movie. That's
a really bad sentence in this day and age.
Yeah, I just realized that.
You just realized that. I'm just saying.
Yeah. And then they come in and they chop off Imhotep's head.
Wow. Shit. That makes things problematic. Oh, God.
As problematic as what I said earlier?
It was close.
Yeah. I don't even remember what I said earlier, but whatever.
Let's never speak of it again.
But yeah, she basically turns him back into the desiccated corpse, but doesn't kill him.
No, she just does that and then fucks off.
Yeah, she tries to commit suicide again, but then Mike is like, no, Helen, you're still in there, and then she is. And she comes back to the surface, but then Imhotep comes back to life and starts lurching around.
And I actually thought that was quite funny, is that Imhotep is in mummy form, and Mike just goes, could you turn back into the princess just a little bit? Just a little bit to get rid of it?
That was pretty funny.
Yeah.
So they're kind of like trying to get away. He's blind and they're trying not to make any noise.
Yeah.
And it's reminding me of the ending of Halloween 2 where they shoot out Michael Myers' eyes and they're like making noise to distract him. And it's kind of a suspenseful sequence. It works more or less okay. And it ends with Mike torching him and killing him.
Which is kind of anticlimactic.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, he already had the big magical kills, so. And so the pyramid starts collapsing. They escape out of it along with the cat.
Which is another thing I reckon was used in the film. The whole pyramid collapsing at the end.
Yeah, because the city all collapses at the end because Benny's an idiot.
Yeah.
As you do when you're Kevin J. O'Connor in the Stephen Sommers movie. Which, that's another weird connection now that I think of it, because Kevin J. O'Connor is in There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis.
Wow, this is freaky. The amount of stuff that's connecting is freaky.
And so they escape, and Helen's like, well, what did the princess say to you? And Mike says, you should live so you can meet a charming archaeologist, and that was funny.
Funny, but also kind of cheesy.
Yeah, it was kind of cheesy, and then they walk off into the desert, kind of cracking jokes, and then, of course, they're going to go to prison because of all those dead cops in their apartment.
Of course.
And some guy's going to show up and say, no more dead cops.
Can we not be problematic?
That's not what I meant the guy from The Dark Knight.
But still, it's getting a bit too close.
No more dead cops. Sorry.
Yeah.
But no, and there's this interesting part where it says, it changes into a wall painting, and then okay, this is a fuck up on the script's part, but it's permissible because this was before the internet, before you could easily look this up, but it says it's a Sam Cooke song, but it's really a Smokey Robinson song.
Oh. I was kind of confused by that, because I looked it up and I was like, what? What the hell's going... What? It was weird. But it does, like, outline the lyrics as well at the end.
But the lyrics actually fit the movie.
Yeah.
I'll read them out.
Mm.
I don't like you, but I love you. Seems like I'm always dreaming of you. You treat me badly. I love you madly. You really got a hold on me.
Mm.
Which kind of fits the material. Now, the issue there is that might come across as a little too silly.
Maybe. Especially after you've had, you know, a lot of serious stuff just happen.
A lot of soul sucking and...
Yeah. So, it's hard to say.
But yeah, overall, pretty good script.
Yeah, and I was pleasantly surprised with it. It wasn't a slog to read.
I don't know what you were expecting.
I know, I wasn't, I didn't know either, but it wasn't... You were expecting that Terminator one I described. Basically, yeah, and something a bit more standard. But yeah, like I said, it wasn't a slog to read. I read it pretty quickly.
But wouldn't this all be improved with aliens and a transsexual villain?
No.
I'm gonna ask that at the end of every script. But the story of what happened with this is that Joe Dante was happy with the script, or maybe there were a couple more drafts, I'm not sure.
Mm.
But he was willing to go ahead, but there was an executive who felt like who said they had to spend only $15 million on this.
Only $15
million, because he felt like that horror films weren't worth more than that.
Well, he's an idiot.
But the budget that was estimated for this script was $25 million. Isn't that far out of the range, really?
No, I mean, for a movie, that's still pretty...
And the irony is that they ended up spending $80 million on the Stephen Sommers version.
Yeah, I mean, that's a massive difference.
And so what happened is, right, they showed the script to Spielberg, because Joe Dante, he worked, for Amblin early on, did Gremlins there. And Spielberg really liked the script and said, hey, I'll help you out. I'm old friends with, Sid Sheinberg, who was the head of Universal at the time, who basically discovered Spielberg. Let's go show this to him. And they went to show it to him while he was on the set of Casper, so they were in the big haunted mansion set. And they showed it to him, and he said, I don't like it. And they said, why? He was like, well, it should be a period picture like the original. And Joe Dante said he wanted to say, the original's not a period picture. It takes place in the year it came out.
Yeah, that's dumb.
But so yeah, that killed this version of it, and I'm like, well, you could have easily trimmed a few million off, maybe replaced the pyramid with something else.
Yeah. And I mean, it wouldn't have been too difficult to have, it set like it is in the movie in the 1920s.
But once again, that costs more money.
Oh, yeah, I guess I'm not really thinking about that, am I?
But yeah, you could have got the budget down very simply and just been like, okay, well, we'll reduce the pyramid down to something else. Reduce 3 scarab killings down to 1, and you got it.
Yeah, there are ways around it, and it's set in modern LA. There's not much in the way of set or costume. Yeah, a lot of it could be really easy to trim down.
But yeah, so for those reasons, it didn't happen. And eventually, so Dante was out, and a certain zombie filmmaker signed on. Yes, going by my not-so-subtle hint and Deusdaecon's Goering reaction, George Romero came into this process yet again. But one interesting fact I came across while doing just some random Google searching is that according to this one Google Books result about Sam Raimi's filmography, is that he apparently was offered the Ormsby Sayles draft to direct after Joe Dante left. And I don't know if that's true or not, or if the book was bullshitting. But
yeah.
And so Romero came in, and the draft is dated 94. Now, since these two drafts, the George Romero and the Mick Garris draft, are very close and are almost exactly the same, I'm just going to do most of the background information first.
Yeah.
Because Romero at the time got involved because he was working on the project with MGM called Before I Wake, which was a film which MGM kept delaying it, and so Romero just said, hey, I'm going to go do The Mummy. His version got the green light, and he would have gone to go make it, but then MGM pulled a contract thing saying, oh, you have to make Before I Wake now, and so he couldn't do The Mummy. Which, interestingly enough, that he's not the first horror director to have issues. Well, not the last one to have issues with a film called Before I Wake, because Mike Flanagan just did a film called Before I Wake, which...
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought I recognized the name.
Yeah, still hasn't gotten an official release in the US, I don't think. In fact, last year he was tweeting saying you should just go buy the Canadian Blu-ray. But yeah, so George Romero he basically got kicked off for really bullshit reasons, and it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, the man may have done some shit since then, but you gotta feel bad for him in this instance. Yeah. Because that was total nonsense. And so Mick Garris gets brought in again to the project, and he did another rewrite. And he got brought in because this is 1995, he had just come off of doing the Stand miniseries, which was a ratings and critical smash, and so he was acceptable as a director to the studio.
That makes sense, I guess.
And so that's how we get these two drafts. I'll go into why he left later, because that's honestly kind of funny. Like, really darkly funny what happened with him. But yeah, I'll do some quoting from the Fangoria article when that time comes. Right. But so, let's start off on the Romero script. Now, what both these scripts are is they're rewrites of the Ormsby Sayles.
Yeah, you can definitely see the fingerprints, I guess you'd say, of the others.
Yeah, of the other one, because there's similar scenes and similar characters. For example, the plot is still Imhotep's mummy is found and resurrected in the modern day, and he's looking to rekindle, his lost love, who is now Helen Grover, who in this version is an archaeologist instead of a lawyer, which I think was a really good change.
Yes, because it made more sense, to be honest.
And she still has her modern day love interest, who is Mike Rosinski, who I still want to call Mike Wazowski. But their relationship is incredibly different, and the events are incredibly different. You still get the deal with Set for immortality, and he touches people to absorb their life essence, and you get an MRI scene, and there's a bunch of characters have similar names, but a lot of the details are different. So the overall story arc is the same, but also the overall point of this story is very different as we go along.
Yeah.
But essentially, the overall plot of this boils down to, we have archaeologist Helen Grover who uncovers the lost tomb of an unidentified mummy who we eventually discover is Imhotep. And he resurrects and is going in search of her for his own purposes. We don't know whether, in this version, we're not really sure whether they're malicious or not until the very ending. But there's 3 artifacts from the tomb which have disappeared because of, it gets really stupidly complicated in the Romero version. And so Imhotep wakes up his mummy enforcer, I guess you'd call him, Garris, to go and retrieve the items that he needs to perform this ritual that he wants to do, which...
I mean, I did like the fact that, because one of my main complaints was, that once Imhotep has become human, it kind of ceases to be a mummy. So this kind of keeps it, at least in keeping with that idea. So there's still a mummy about, but Imhotep can still be his thing, So I kind of like that.
Yes, it was a pretty cool idea, and I like it because it's a nice tribute to all of the Universal Mummy films, because of the 5 Universal Mummy films, 4 of them are Garris films.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, granted, these scripts kind of dispense with because Garris has the exact same backstory as Imhotep. They just swapped out names. Instead of, the High Priest Imhotep, it's Prince Garris. Instead of Princess Ankhsenamen, and I'm always going with the original movie's pronunciation, despite what Stephen Sommers went with, because that's just what I know.
Yeah.
And because Imhotep says it like 100 times in a row in that scene. But it's Princess Ananka in the Garris films. And instead of stealing the Scroll of Thoth to resurrect her, he steals the Tana leaves, which will resurrect her by making tea out of them. So he's ancient Egyptian by way of the UK.
Right, yeah.
Which is so funny. And I guess when Hammer did their version, they were remaking the Garris films. They went, yeah, we can't really make tea evil.
Yeah.
So they brought back the scroll concept.
Yeah, I can understand that.
But no, I thought that was a clever idea. I like that's a nice tribute to the original movies. I think that's kind of cool to give both mummies kind of their own time in the spotlight.
Yeah, because I think one of the things about the other script was that it was basically the same Karloff version.
Yes. Just
kind of modernized. Whereas this at least takes, combinations from all of them and makes it something interesting.
Yes. Now, going point by, because we're going to talk about these 2 drafts at the same time, going completely point by point won't really be possible. because, I mean, they're so very similar that, like, if I go into every single teeny tiny difference, we'll be here for, like, 5 hours just on these two. So I'll go in very general purposes, and I'll talk about the things that stick out to me. Now, the Romero and the Garris drafts, they both start out very similarly in ancient Egypt, with Ankhnamen and Imhotep in his bedchamber, and they specifically have sex in the Garris draft. But no, he's going to perform a ritual where he makes her drink animal blood from a goblet after she puts this necklace on, which has, I believe it has Set's head as part of the necklace in one of them.
I found that kind of comical, the amount of stuff he has to do. It's like, okay, put this on. Okay, now drink this. It was just a bit much.
Well, I mean, if you look at... This is simple compared to a lot of actual real rituals.
I guess.
But I mean, dear God, look at some of that medieval magic stuff. They fucking chant the same shit a million times and draw a circle on the floor. And it was foretold by gyromancy, but okay. Silent Hill reference. But so what he's doing is that he's getting her... It's a different animal in both drafts. In Romero, it's a lion. And in Garris, it's a jackal. And so he's getting her to drink the blood out of the chalice, and then he goes to stab her with the dagger. And what happens is that the priests of Isis, they break in to save Ankhnamen.
Similar to how they did it in the Sommers film as well.
Sort of, only they actually succeed in their point.
Yeah, you can actually see that was definitely clearly, something that remained somewhat.
Now, in the Garris draft, there's a change that I actually prefer in that version where, because in the Romero version, they're just in the chamber, and then Garris the mummy is introduced as a mummy when they dig up Imhotep's tomb. In the Garris version, Garris is guarding the door, and so you see him get subdued and then mummified. I think that adds a little bit more to their relationship.
Yeah, it kind of shows that, he wasn't just some random guy put in the tomb.
Like, he was a loyal servant.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that is a better change.
And so, okay, what happens is that, he finds out that she did not survive. She didn't get killed by the knife getting stabbed into her. What the hell am I talking about? He missed his mark. And
it's kind of ambiguous, at least for me, when I read it. Because it was like, did he miss, or was there something about ISIS stepping in and all this bollocks?
Who knows? It's kept ambiguous, or maybe he subconsciously missed because he loved her too much.
Maybe.
But it's revealed that he had a deal with the gods set for eternal life, and what he had to do to seal the deal was to kill the one who loved him so that he could prove that the only love he needed came from Set. So, cabbage semen and sun babies coming from your forehead.
Yes. Right.
Egyptian mythology is weird.
It is.
And here's a difference between the drafts is that in the Romero draft, she says, exile him, and then she leaves, and then they get on the boat and take him to his tomb. In the Garris draft, this is weird because it's like his house and the tomb are in the same building.
Yeah, that is odd, the way there's no transition there.
And then she just says, oh, okay, seal him up, so she knows what happened to him. I think I like the Romero draft a bit better in this instance.
Well, it makes more sense because in the Garris draft, don't all the people who bury him kill themselves?
Yeah, they do in both.
They do in both, but in the Garris draft, Ankhnamen, she knows anyway.
Yeah,
so it's kind of irrelevant that they don't really need to kill themselves.
But no, the priests and I think there's some soldiers. They take Imhotep to the tomb. In the Romero draft, and in the Garris draft, they seal him up inside there too. But basically, he gets sealed inside this tomb, and he's so super strong they have to magically seal the sarcophagus shut. And they chisel his name off the walls. They chisel the eyes out of the two stone falcons. Now the statue of Set that's in the temple, the little temple inside the tomb. They seal the tomb shut with the seal of Isis. In the Romero draft, the high priest decides to take a piss on the door.
Oh yeah, that was weird.
That was stupid. that was Romero. Like Romero, that would have worked in Creepshow, but not here. And then they all he goes and he pounds the spikes into all the people's heads with his scepter, and then pounds it into his.
Yeah.
And then that ends the prologue. And I know I said I liked how in the previous draft there wasn't like a prologue in Ancient Egypt explaining everything. I like what they do here because you get some information, but you don't get the full story here. You get more as it goes along. It's given to you piecemeal.
I'd say so. It felt a little bit like, trying to think of a good example. I mean, the problem is, I'm looking for a good example, and the only one I can think of is the way they took the opening in the first Mummy and they expanded it in the second Mummy. So expanding it.
I have an idea. I have a good example. The first Hellraiser.
Yes.
You see what happens to Frank at the beginning, but you don't get the full explanation of it until later.
Yes, exactly. That's a good example. Let's not reference the second one as a good example.
Wait, which one?
The second Mummy. I mean.
Oh yeah, that was that expansion where they're apparently having their illicit affair on a very open and visible balcony.
Yes.
Which wasn't there in the first movie.
Yeah.
Even as a 9-year-old seeing that in the theater, I'm like, that doesn't make sense.
Mm.
But okay, we've bashed on Mummy Returns enough for now.
Yeah.
So okay, this is one of the big diversions that the Romero draft has compared to the others, is that he cuts to Helen and her parents, who are archaeologists, when she's a kid, in, I believe it's the 70s. And they're visiting, the area where Imhotep's tomb is, and she says, oh, you should dig over here, but her father says, no, I'm going to go by my instincts.
Yeah.
Then it cuts to the present day in the 90s, and she's an adult, an archaeologist. She's negotiating with Eleanor, who's the rich funding woman. And she gets her funding for the expedition, but oh no, she has to cancel her marriage to Mike Rosinski because this is going to take a year, and he's being, honestly, kind of an asshole.
Yeah, it's just a little time, but then he just says, fuck it.
Yeah, and they walks out, and they have this argument over the damn tuxedo, and this is one thing that the Garris draft fixes, is that throughout this Romero version, they're constantly arguing over this. And in the Garris version, they're talking about it like normal people.
Yeah, well, in the Garris version, they're not even together at the start.
No, they cut, what I was going to say is that this whole swath of things with her as a child, her getting the funding, and that whole conversation with Mike, that is all cut out of the Garris draft, which is for the better.
Yeah.
Like, maybe I'd prefer having the child thing in there just to set up a little more motivation. But other than that, cut all that other stuff out because you don't need it. But yeah, but in the Garris version, they're far less antagonistic in their relationship. It's clear that they have their issues, but they're talking them out over the course of the thing. They're not just immediately going to... There's this horrible, horrible conversation they have in the car later on where he's talking about his priorities.
Oh, God,
which is terrible, but in the Garris version, he's very calmly explaining what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And I don't even want to get into that, so yeah, that was shit. But okay, so it cuts, another year later, and she's digging up the tomb. And in both versions, this is more or less the same, where they find the tomb, and they go inside, and there's this thing about how, there's sand moving in the walls that causes the doors to open and close, which I have never heard of that actually being a thing in Egyptian tombs.
No, it's a bit too complicated, really, for Egyptian tombs.
Yes, and it gets really stupid later.
Well, I think what is kind of the weirdest part is that Egyptian tombs are never supposed to be opened, so why would they bother?
I don't know.
It's a bit excessive for something that's supposed to be sealed forever. But
no, while they're there, she finds, the pouch with the different ritual items in it that are gonna be hugely important later. They're the items that go missing: the necklace, the goblet, and the dagger. And a secret panel opens up, and Garris is inside there, and they find the mummy.
That was actually a pretty good moment, because I liked the way it was. It was. I'm trying to figure out how to say it.
Surprising.
It was surprising, and it had that kind of shock value, which I liked. Like in the Sommers version, where they open up the sarcophagus, and he's like, "Blah."
Only here he pops out for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I liked it, is that it made a lot more sense, and it was a lot more in keeping with what was going on.
Yes, and I like it because in the Hammer film, The Mummy, Garris is kept inside a secret wall panel like that.
Yeah. Oh, so it is an actual reference almost.
It might be, and in the Hammer film, it's opened up because the little box containing the scroll is removed from its niche in the wall, and that causes sand to fall. which then pops open the door.
Okay.
That's actually a one that's actually quite worth watching. It's pretty good. Christopher Lee has a giant fuck-off mummy in it. Like, seriously, like, damn, that dude really is tall. But no, so they find Garris, and then they find the sarcophagus. And one thing I want to talk about in this is that in the Romero version, it happens multiple times in this where there's just like nameless like background characters chatting. And like there's archaeologist here, MRI technician, blah blah blah. In the Garris draft, he actually makes them characters who keep recurring throughout the script.
Yeah, he takes the ancillary characters and kind of boils them down to one or two and makes them recurring and makes that when they die, it makes it far more, interesting.
Yes, and
as well.
And like, for example, you have Richard Williams, who is an incredibly minor character in the Romero draft to the point where he's in 2 scenes. The second of which he's in 3 scenes, the third of which he dies, and you're like, wait a minute, he was important?
Yeah.
Whereas here, he actually is a recurring thing throughout, and it's like, oh, it kind of sucks when he dies.
Right, yeah.
And you get Jenny, who was his wife, who ends up being his wife. There's this whole weird thing about him being attracted to Helen, which literally you could direct that out of the movie because it goes nowhere in the script and has no point.
Yeah, it's literally there as filler. That's all I can see it as.
It's literally just in the descriptive passages. And of course you have at the dig site you have Walter Norton, who is the curator at the museum. And he explains to Helen that, Eleanor, the rich woman, she wants the tomb taken out in its entirety and moved to the wing of the museum. Now, in the Romero draft, she's just an evil rich bitch.
Yeah.
And she's, as Romero would. Yeah,
she's just, the classic money grubber that Romero loves to do.
She's Dennis Hopper from Land of the Dead, only a woman.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wicked ass props to you, Mr. OG. But in the Garris draft, she flies out there in her helicopter, John Hammond style, and you find out that not only do her and Helen have a very close relationship, but she wants the tomb moved for a reason, and all this done too quickly because she's dying. And it humanizes the character and makes her less just unsympathetic mummy bait later.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I have a huge issue with this whole plot point of them taking the tomb in its entirety, because I'm just imagining fucking like Zahi Hawass agreeing to this, and it's just like, why would the Egyptian Antiquities Service?
Yeah, especially in that day and age. Maybe in like the Victorian era, they wouldn't say anything, but not that time. They would be like, no, this stays here, thank you.
I mean, the Garris draft kind of papers over it by saying that, people have been bought.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it reminds me of just the really odd stuff that they do in, like, the Hammer Mummy, where they dynamite the entrance to the tomb closed after they leave.
Yeah.
I'm like, as far as I know, pretty much every tomb that's been excavated, they left it fucking open. And you could...
I couldn't not imagine the tomb just swinging from the bottom of a helicopter, like that bit in Batman Forever with the safe.
It's boiling acid!
Exactly. That's what I kind of thought, because how else are they going to move it intact? Unless they just move it brick by brick. But then what's the point?
But then, okay, it cuts, which is what's really stupid, is that in the climax, the fucking, sand-filled booby trap doors are still working.
I know, that makes even less sense.
Wouldn't you, disable that shit?
Well, yeah, you disable that shit, but also, where's the sand coming from? It's in a freaking building.
And they confirm later on that the walls don't even go to the ceiling.
Yeah.
Because Garris, vaults over the wall later.
So, I have no idea how they would film that in a way that would make it look plausible in any sense.
No, not at all. And so, okay, cuts to opening night of this wing of the museum. Now, Eleanor has a different name in every draft, so I can't even be bothered. In fact, she was a very different character in the Ormsby Sayles draft. She was just a woman who worked at the museum.
Yeah.
Then Imhotep just kills her. So they're doing the big grand opening of the exhibit, and here's where we re-meet Mike in the Romero draft and meet him for the first time in the Garris draft. And it's such a better introduction for him, I think.
I think this would have been better if he wasn't, in a relationship with the main character, and this was his first introduction as some kind of, fence. Not fence, but, someone who tracks down fences.
Someone that she knows, yeah.
Exactly.
Because his job in this script is that he's kind of Nathan Drakey in the sense that he tracks down stolen items.
Yeah, it's kind of Indiana Jones meets Nathan Drake meets, a standard Romero love interest.
I can't think of a Romero film that has really much of a love interest in it, but...
I was thinking Land of the Dead again.
Oh, yeah. So you're imagining him as Simon Baker.
Basically, yeah. It definitely had that kind of personality.
But okay, so they have their thing, they have their little bit of a meeting, and they're actually civilized to each other in both drafts. He's saying, hey, you did good, basically. You accomplished what you were out for, but she's still upset about what happened. And she notices that those 3 specific items from the pouch are missing. And in the Romero draft, there's this long, complicated thing where Norton is like, well, we had to bribe the Egyptian authorities with them, and there's this whole, did he steal the items, did he not? Okay, I'm going to cut to the chase and say he didn't steal them in the Romero version, so it's a completely pointless subplot.
Yeah, it's just to set up the mystery and kind of draw it out a bit, but it's not even that effective.
In fact, in the Romero version, it's Richard Williams, the assistant curator in that draft, who is in 3 scenes, in the 3rd of which he dies.
Yeah.
So it's like, what was the point? But no, in the Garris draft, eventually we find out, no, Norton is the one who's been siphoning artifacts out of the museum to support his lifestyle. You find that out pretty early on, but okay, I skipped ahead because it's an annoying thing in the Romero draft.
Well, which again, it's like, okay, again, in like the 1920s, maybe, but not in modern era. It just wouldn't happen.
Not when I was 3.
Yeah, exactly.
But okay, so they go to the big, main attraction happens where they're gonna go open the sarcophagus and find out what's in it. And so they open it up, and I thought this was pretty gross in a good way, is that when they lift the lid up, the mummy of Imhotep comes up with it because his fingernails have been jammed into the lid for trying to carve something in there. Now and that is an image that was reused in the Sommers film.
Yeah.
Now in the Romero draft, it's not specified exactly what he's trying to scratch in there.
No, it's just a random scratching, really, isn't it?
But in the Garris draft, she can make out the I and the M when she examines it later, so he's trying to scratch his name in there.
Yes.
Which makes total sense because he wants his name to be preserved.
Yeah, and it actually makes a lot more sense than him scratching, what was it?
Death is only the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, why would you bother?
And here it's specified as a mahogany lid, whereas in the movie it looks like it's made out of stone.
And aren't they supposed to be made out of stone? Because I don't think wood would last that long.
The inner coffins tend to be made out of wood.
Oh, okay.
The big outer sarcophagus is stone, and the ones in the middle are like prepared wood or something like that.
Right. Okay.
And Tutankhamun's inner coffin was solid gold.
Oh, of course it was. Flash bastard.
Yeah, he had that swag. And so this leads to them deciding that they need to take it to the MRI Institute for examination.
Yeah, basically the same way in the other script as well.
In the other script, and it's more or less the same, except it happens with different characters. Now, this is another scene in the Garris, in the Romero draft, where it's just MRI technician, head technician, person, and in the Garris draft, he makes it these minor characters we've been reading about, including because there's a technician named Colorado, which is just what? Yeah. He comes into the Romero draft after the scene where they're examining the mummy. But in the Garris draft, he's one of the technicians who's working on it, and he actually has a human moment because the female technician, I forget her name, she brushes into the mummy's hand.
Yeah.
And she feels like, the power or whatever, and she freaks out, and he goes, "Hey, are you okay?" He acts like a decent human being, whereas after they all leave the lab, Colorado walks in and is just acting like a dickhead towards the mummy.
Oh, yeah. And it's
just saying stupid shit, and he gets grabbed by the mummy and absorbed.
But again, that feels a lot. That is very Romero kind of thing as well. People just being dicks.
And that goes on throughout this script. There's just these weird stereotypical people with weird voices. And what's great about the Garris draft, he cuts almost all of them out, except for the store clerk.
Yeah, but that's only because he's kind of necessary.
Yeah, he kept Apu in the movie.
Yeah, basically.
But so you get him sort of, rummaging through the guy's pockets, taking his clothes, looking at the money and whatnot. And he wanders out, he sees, an airplane flying overhead, which is a good moment of wonder and awe.
Yeah.
And in the Romero version, there's a bit where he's walking by a football stadium and people are just dicks for no reason.
Yeah, and he's like, he's supposed to look like a really, really old man at this point, isn't he?
Yeah, he's he's slowly sort of, sucking people dry.
Yeah.
And not in a sexual way.
Although so you say that, well, he does pick up, what was it, a box of,
condoms.
Yeah, what were they called? Ramesses?
Ramses, yeah, that's a brand of condom.
Yeah, and it was like, why? Why?
He picks it up because he sees the Pharaoh with his name on it.
I know, but it's just such a stupid moment.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, this happens right after that, where he walks into the 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
And he's like fucking around with like the drink dispensers, not really knowing what they are. And he's like, and like the store clerk is really annoying, just like talking in like broken English and stuff. And I'm like, I'm sure I've run into many foreign fucking convenience store clerks who speak better English than this guy does. But no, he sucks that guy dry, and he escapes in slightly different ways in both drafts. But yeah, we get the scene at the synagogue.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes.
Where he goes and he meets the rabbi, and he takes all the knowledge from the books, and then I believe this is his last, for the moment, sort of, energy sucking thing. And I like how he says, I don't wish this on you, but it's something I have to do. Because that sets up one of the more interesting character complexities in these drafts for him, because whereas the previous draft and the original film, it was a man whose intense love turned to obsession and drove him mad.
Yeah.
This is a guy who got a bum deal and is trying to make his way out of it. And he doesn't like the situation he's in. He hates what he's become, which is an interesting take on the character.
Yeah, but I think, again, that's kind of similar to the Sommers film. Like, he didn't ask for the immortality, but in the Sommers film, he just rolled with it.
Yeah, he just rolled with it, and he's like, fire from the sky.
Even though it doesn't make any sense, but never mind.
Yeah, and the pyramids moved back to Cairo. But again, we also find out that Mike, because he sniffed out, because he's good at this sort of thing, he on a hunch, he went to customs and he finds out that those 3 items, they did come into the country. And what I like about the Garris draft is that Helen actually asks him to go looking for them.
Yeah, she actually sees it as like, this is odd. Where are they? I mean, it makes more sense, there. Like I said.
Instead of her just kind of, complaining about it and Mike just going, oh yeah, I'm gonna go look.
But I guess it does make more sense because, in the Garris draft, because she has to have a way of talking with the guy and getting to know him as a person, and that's a way of doing it. Whereas in the Romero draft, they already know each other, so it's not as necessary.
No, yeah, I actually did like that. Well, they actually did know each other in the Garris draft, but it had been a while. But to continue on, so Imhotep goes and visits the tomb in the museum, and he runs into Helen, and he immediately recognizes her for who she is, the reincarnation of Ankhsenamen. And he's talking to her, and he notices that the pieces are missing. And so they walk out of the place, and there's a security guard whom I remembered his name in the Romero draft because it was really funny and stereotypical. His name was Paddy O'Bannon. Oh, yeah. Which just makes me think of the main Irish guy in Survival of the Dead. It says he was O'Flynn, I think.
Yeah, he was.
But he's a different character in the Garris draft. And we get this thing in the Romero draft where he watches and he finds out what the code is to open the security shutters, explaining how he goes back in. In the Garris draft, that's different. He apparently just punches a wall in the basement. Yeah,
it kind of shows, in the Romero version at least, it kind of shows that he's a bit more clever.
Yeah.
And understanding a bit quicker.
And there's this thing in the Romero draft where O'Bannon hears them speaking ancient Egyptian together, and that makes her suspicious later on, which I'm glad that's gone in the Garris draft.
Yeah, again, it was just another red herring that went nowhere.
Yeah, it's this whole thing about making her she does become a suspect later on in the Garris draft, but I like the way he did it better, that's the thing. And so she agrees to let Imhotep walk her home because she apparently lives walking distance from the museum. Now, the Romero draft has one of the most irritating characters gets introduced at this point.
Oh, the street tough or whatever his name is.
The street tough, the white, he's a wigger, basically, let's be honest.
Yeah. That's totally what they were going for.
Yeah, and his name is Rhino. Ugh. And that's a character completely gone in the Garris draft. In fact, all the weird stuff with him, like, later on, where he, like, shoots at them, and, like, the bullet grazes Helen's neck, and then Imhotep puts some sweet herb on her neck to fix her up. I guess medical marijuana is permissible in this society. I don't know. Oh, and I should mention, they don't specify what city this is in the Romero.
No, they don't. It was quite confusing, actually.
They don't say where it is. Probably said they could get away with filming absolutely anywhere. But okay, but yeah, he walks her home. There's this twist which doesn't really work in the Romero draft, where she led him to the wrong house, but then he finds out which house she lives in anyways.
Yeah, she leads him to a random building. He leaves her there, thinking that's her place, and then she runs off. But then he just sees her run off, and it's no point whatsoever.
But he talks to her about how, oh, this guy wasn't properly mummified, and she believes that he's part of she comes to the conclusion on her own that he's part of the Antiquities Service, because he says that he knew her in Egypt.
That he's investigating her, basically.
But I like how he doesn't say he's part of that, how she just kind of makes that assumption and he just rolls with it.
Again, showing he's actually, quite clever.
But he's telling her about how mummification was denied to those who are in disfavor, and that his name needs to be restored. Yeah. Now, the Romero draft does something rather clever with the name thing that the Garris draft kind of ignores. Where he specifically needs to have his name restored, and until his name is restored, he's not referred to by name.
Yeah, that was clever.
He was referred to as the Egyptian, but it gets annoying later on, where Garris is constantly referred to as the Mummy, even though we know his name.
Oh, yeah.
And that's only there because, I guarantee you this is the only reason, is because there's a moment at the end of the script where he's buried under rubble, and his hand pops out. And it's only there so we can say, the mummy's hand, blah, blah, blah. And the mummy's hand was the movie that Garris was introduced in.
Oh, God.
Romero!
Yeah, that's a bit much.
So yeah, moving through this, more or less the same events happen in all the different scripts, in these two scripts, just slightly differently. So it gets a little sort of confusing to go back and forth on.
Mm.
Like in the Romero draft, Helen does her research, but she has this weird thing where she's looking up stuff on the very early 90s internet, and she has a voice read it out for her because apparently she's illiterate.
Oh yeah, that was weird. It's just a weird, really sort of rudimentary as well, text-to-speech for no real reason.
And she finds Imhotep's name in an ancient text. Now, in the Garris draft, it makes more sense that she goes directly to his name, because she has those scratchings on the coffin to go by. In the Romero version, she just figures it out.
Yeah.
But also, while this is going on, Imhotep goes to the museum, and he awakes Garris, and basically what he's going to do is he's going to use Garris as his mummy muscle to get the ritual items back. And one thing about Garris as a mummy that's an interesting detail is that his eyes have been replaced with 2 polished black stones.
Oh yeah, I like that, because it kind of gave it a bit more
creepy
idea that he's just got these big black stones as eyes, and it's just really just a creepy image of this. Because I think it would have been a bit more comical if they were just, the sunken sockets, basically. So I think it gives that sort of him the ability to see and to know where he's looking, but not just give him goofy looking eyes.
Also, I think it's a clever reference to the mummy's hand, because in the mummy's hand, whenever they show Garris in close-ups, his eyes are blacked out.
Ah, okay.
They went and blacked it out frame by frame, and I remember seeing that as a kid and just thinking that was really insanely creepy.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something you would see until that shot happens, and then it happens, it's like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, even now watching, I need to watch that movie again sometime soon, because that's actually a pretty good one, too.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then, in the Romero draft, there's a really annoying, I think, stereotypical janitor, although I don't know what stereotype he's supposed to be filling.
I thought it was, kind of Mexican sounding.
Or was his name I couldn't figure out what the accent was. I think his name is Sanchez, but they don't really, the voice doesn't sound like a Mexican stereotype when I read it.
I think it's supposed to be a Mexican, but they just couldn't get the accent right written down.
Romero?
Yeah.
Again, Romero is the guy who in Dawn of the Dead had, a biker gang member wearing a sombrero.
Oh, God, yeah.
Who tries to get his blood pressure taken. But okay,
mid-gunfight,
yes. Mid-zombies everywhere.
Anyway.
But yeah, in in the Romero draft, it's the security guard who's reading, in the Garris draft, I mean, it's a security guard who is reading like a really like high-level book. Like, that was interesting. Like, he was an interesting character just on the basis of that. Like, he's this big, beefy security guard reading something. But no, either way, that character gets Garris grabs him, shoves him into Imhotep, who then sucks him dry, because in this version, it's not a permanent regeneration. He has to keep doing it.
Yeah, and also, if you just touch his skin, he's like Rogue from X-Men.
Yes, and I think that's an interesting take. It makes him a more tortured character.
Yeah.
And okay, so that happens. And then, okay, and so Helen's off researching at her house. And, okay, while all this is going on, like, okay, so Colorado's desiccated corpse back at the hospital. They think that's the mummy.
And it takes an ungodly amount of time for them to realize it as well.
I mean,
it's not.
In the previous draft, they figured that out almost immediately.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it's like, oh, some guy took samples, and so they find out that most of the body is 150 years old, and Norton's all pissed off about it. And then Mike shows up at Helen's apartment, and in both scripts, he makes a meta joke that just makes no sense.
Is that the bit where it's like in brackets doing Karloff?
Yes, because in the Romero version, he does the Karloff impression saying, I am a Death Bay. That movie should not exist in this universe.
Yeah, I don't understand it.
And then in the Garris draft, he says, I come bearing Chinese food and Tana leaf tea. Which, that's what brought Garris to life in the old Universal movies, and should also not be a reference you are making in this universe.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell?
It's a bad sign when your meta joke is so meta, it makes no, sense in continuity.
Now, this is where the two drafts really start sort of diverging, because this is where Garris starts going after the people who have the artifacts. And they happen in different orders and for different reasons, and some of the characters are different.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm just going to cover all of them now, because it's like, it just gets really, it's a series of events that gets pretty goddamn complicated. So, okay, in the Romero draft, Mike and Helen, they go to Eleanor's mansion and Mike's going to interrogate her about the missing items. And she's a bitch about it, and they leave, and then they have that terrible conversation about priorities in the car.
Oh, yeah.
Garris shows up, by the way, there's a party going on during all of this with a blind pianist for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Garris knocks off the butler's head, who just reminds me of the butler from Land of the Dead.
Oh, yeah. But it also just reminded me of, the epic Jason punch.
Oh, yeah, and Jason Takes Manhattan.
Yeah.
Which is a kill you can do in the game. And then he goes into the party room and just slaughters everyone, and Romero shows some restraint here in that you don't see anything, really. You just see an arm get thrown out of the window.
Yeah, it's very subdued. I mean, he could have gone completely mental. Yeah, it's surprisingly subdued.
But then,
considering it's like probably the most bloody scene in the entire thing.
And then the next bit that happens in the Romero script in terms of the items is that there's a fence who has the cup named Willie, who's in a pawn shop, and he just reminds me of the pawn shop owner from Daredevil Season 2.
Yeah.
Really stupidly mentioned child porn to the Punisher.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's sitting there, and he's talking on the phone, drinking beer out of the goblet, looking at a magazine, and I think masturbating?
Yeah, it's inferred, but it's not explicitly stated.
He's playing with himself.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
It's like Romero just wanted to make this character as disgusting as possible, so we don't care if he dies.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
it's just something else he does.
Garris then shows up there, busts into the pawn shop, picks him up, and by the way, the security camera is recording this because I have to make a certain Romero joke later on. And he picks him up, grabs him by the crotch, and rips out, as they say later, his entire urinary tract.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's described really weird. It says he loses the inseam of his pants and his testosterone. Which is just like, okay, that was needlessly painful.
Yeah. There's nothing about that was needed.
Maybe just punch him across the room, take the goblet, and leave.
Yeah, I mean, is he there to kill, or is he there to take the goblet? I mean, surely it takes more effort to do what he did.
Okay, and then this is where it gets really stupid in the Romero draft, because the third item, what happens is that you see, because it's ambiguous as to whether Norton is stealing it or not, there's this creepy bit where he goes into his condo and then nothing happens. And then Richard Williams, who drove him to his condo, gets pulled into the sewer and just beat to shit by Garris. And then you find out that the dagger is in his desk at the museum, so why bother sending Garris after him?
Yeah.
It's right there. Why didn't they get it first?
Yeah, again, I think the problem is, right, the script is trying to get the horror stuff, but the horror stuff is kind of counterproductive to what the characters want. You know, it's just added time when clearly time is not on his side. So it's a bit excessive.
Okay, so you have that, and then, okay, in the Garris draft, what happens is that it was Norton who took the items, and that he gave the goblet to an art gallery director who has like a dungeon full of antiquities named Shoji Nakagawa. Garris goes after him first, he grabs him by his fucking ponytail, smashes him into the wall, and then gouges his eyes out, and there's this funny description where it says, "Pop, pop, see no evil." Yeah. And he poses his body underneath one of the displays, which I thought was creepy.
Oh yeah, it was a creepy moment.
And there's a weird sort of convenient ordering in the Romero version where it's like we see Willie die, then Mike shows up and the police are already there.
Yeah, the police are there. He shows up and they're like, "What the fuck are you doing here?"
And they don't find out about the mansion until later.
Yeah, the mansion is way later as well,
even though it already happened. But no, so they watched the security footage of the mummy killing the guy, and I'm like, where else have I seen Romero do mummy on security footage? Oh yeah, Diary of the Dead. Only nobody screams at this mummy that dead things don't move fast.
Yeah, fucking hell.
That is Romero's worst movie.
Hands down, yeah.
Of what I've seen. It sure as shit ain't no Martin.
Yeah.
But okay, but in the Garris draft, Mike goes to talk to this guy because he knows he's a fence and he wants to ask him questions, finds his body, then goes to the police. Which I like. And then, of course, the third item, what happens is that Jenny and Richard figured out that what Norton was doing, and they basically kind of sort of blackmail him into giving them one of the items, which is the necklace. And it's kind of a bitch move, but I mean, Norton's a dickhead anyway, so who cares?
Yeah, nobody cares. I mean.
And so they're all happy, getting drunk and having sex, and then Garris and Imhotep show up at their place. Garris fucking kills her, and then Richard, like an idiot, tries to fight Imhotep, and then Imhotep just sucks him dry. That's much better than, this guy who was unimportant just randomly is killed for no reason, and the knife was in his desk. Yeah,
it gives it far more character.
And he actually is a character in the Garris draft, whereas in the Romero draft, it's like, wait a minute, who is that guy?
Yeah, it was just so pointless, and it kind of just felt like, okay, let's get this over and done with and do whatever, doesn't matter.
And then the Garris draft, what happens is that Helen finds the hole in the wall where Imhotep and Garris have been coming and going, and she finds the room back there where they were stashing the items. So Norton figures out what's going on, that the people who have these items are getting killed, so he has the dagger. He takes the dagger to the mansion, and like an asshole, gets all of those people killed.
That's it.
I mean, there's a really terrible bit where one of the drunk party guests goes, "Hey, mummy, where's your daddy?" or something like that, but...
Random crap. Again, Romero.
Yeah. Romero's sense of humor is not always the best.
Romero has a shit sense of humor, and he's got terrible... When it comes to dialogue, he's a terrible writer.
Sometimes he can be funny, but other times he's hit and miss, I think.
I would change that to most of the time.
Okay, so you have that. Yeah. Now, to get back to the sequence of events, you have Imhotep, he meets Helen out in the street again. We're all out of sequence now, but fuck it.
It doesn't matter.
I had to talk about that all at the same time because it was related.
Yeah.
But he meets her out in the street, and he tells her about how there was this great general who... The backstory is a little bit different in both versions, is that in the Romero draft, it's that he got captured by his enemies, and he escaped and ran across the desert to the point where he was dying of thirst and almost mad, and Set appeared to him in a vision and offered him immortality and a way out in exchange for killing the woman who loved him.
You know what it sounded like to me?
What?
It sounded like the Scorpion King.
Exactly.
It was exactly like the Scorpion King's origin.
He's more of a character than the Scorpion King.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
No, I think it's funny they call it the Devil's Cookstone, so that's where The Rock was cooking. But no, and that adds depth to the character because it shows you he got stuck in a really awful position. I mean, who wouldn't take that deal in his place?
Yeah, it's a hard one to think about, and I think that's key, is that it's like, yeah.
Now, in the Garris draft, this isn't as good, because it's still fine, but I don't like it as much. It's because the Pharaoh did not approve of his general and his daughter having a thing, so he kicked his ass out into the desert. And that's how the deal happened. But that just opens up tons of holes, like, okay, if he got kicked out, why was it okay for him to just suddenly be back in Egypt with, the princess in his pad, and all that? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't thought out very well in that draft.
But okay, there's a difference here between the drafts, is that in the Romero draft, they keep talking out in the street. Rhino shows up and does the thing with the gun, and the bullet nicks Helen's neck, and then Imhotep sucks him dry and then chucks him over the...
The way it's described as well, it totally sounds like a proper ragdoll throw. It's just ridiculous.
It sounds like something you can do in Friday the 13th, the game.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, and there's this creepy thing in the Romero draft, which I liked, which is gone in the Garris draft, and that's that every now and then there's a glimpse of something hovering over Imhotep's shoulder, which is implied to be Set.
Yeah, that was kind of creepy, and I could see that being creepy in a film. As long as they didn't really, focus on it too much, which they didn't. It was quite clever.
Yeah, don't overdo the CGI.
Yeah, exactly.
But okay, in the Romero draft, you have this weird thing where, okay, he can very conveniently turn off his soul-sucking abilities.
Yeah, as long as he just asks for it really, really nicely.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't think that's needed, because I think Set is smart enough to do that automatically with the person that needs to be sacrificed for this ritual to work, which is Helen. And so in the Romero draft, he takes her up to her apartment and fixes her up with the sweet herbs, like I mentioned.
Yeah.
In the Garris draft, they don't stay down in the street. They go back up to the apartment immediately, and they're talking, and then Mike shows up and gets this hilarious jealous moment.
Oh, yeah. But that's because, the Garris draft removed the stupid character.
Yeah, it removed all the stupid characters for the most part.
So that I can, is commendable.
You know what? Shoji, he's a bit of a stereotype, but he's no Willie.
Yeah.
And oh god, I just realized the pun of the guy getting his dick ripped off named Willie.
Oh god, yeah.
Romero!
It really is. Christ.
I would call him Uncle George, but Lucas already took that name. And so this is where events get a little weird. I'm not entirely sure of the differences here, because I've got my notes and they're in separate places on my Word document. I need to find a better way of doing this when they're very similar drafts. But, okay, so, in the Romero draft, he goes to the zoo, wrestles with a lion, rips its throat out with his bare teeth, which is pretty awesome. And then, gathers its blood into a vial. In the Garris draft, it's jackal blood, and I think he goes to the zoo for that, too. I could be wrong. But, okay, in the Romero draft, here's a part I wish stayed in. I wish stayed in the Garris draft, where she gets called to basically meet Imhotep, and she has this weird, creepy dream sequence.
Oh yeah, the whole dream sequence bit was a bit odd.
Where she's meeting all the people that have been killed, and their corpses that are talking to her.
Yeah, that kind of thing is quite prevalent in movies made around this time. Like, for example, Puppet Master, for example. I did that recently. Exact same kind of premise, really. Not as drawn out as the script, but that happens surprisingly large amount of times, I've noticed.
But no, I thought it was actually a decent little creepy scene. Now, it's not in the Garris draft, where she just kind of wanders over to the park instead of the zoo. And she's talking with Imhotep, and it's a nice character scene where he's talking about, hey, I've got this thing wrong with me. No, me going into some sort of medical care is not going to fix it. And it's a great dramatic moment, and then there's 2 pages missing where you don't know what the hell happened.
Right, yeah. That confused me for a moment when I was reading that.
And Mike, you didn't notice the pages were missing?
No, not at first. I have to go back and look it over.
It's written on the title page.
I know, but that's why I have to go back.
But the chain of events here gets a little complicated, because in the Garris draft, like, he looks up supposedly what Imhotep's name is supposed to be, and he's not part of the Egyptian Antiquities Service. But no, I believe they go looking for Helen, because he realizes she might be in danger from this guy who might not be what he says he is, and is doing who might be the one killing everybody. So they go looking for her in both versions. Now, in the Garris draft, there's this really awkward moment where he finds Helen, and the two have just had sex.
Yeah.
Which is needed for the ritual in the Garris draft. And I'm just imagining this really cheesy late 80s, early 90s silhouette sex scene.
Oh, yeah. You know, the absolute classic, soft focus, arse shining in the moonlight. Highlander
sex scene.
Exactly, yeah. But I wanted to say as well, with the name, this might be just my humor coming through, but I always thought none of these scripts actually took advantage of the whole, they could have totally done a joke where somebody reads the name and they're like, Pet Homie?
Oh, and it's backwards?
It's backwards or upside down and that sort of thing. And he was like getting frustrated. I just think that was a missed opportunity.
I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah, I know. I got a stupid sense of humor.
But no, Imhotep, who has been weakened, he's increasingly weak.
Oh, yeah.
The cops get him, put him in the back of the her paddy wagon.
Doesn't he start aging as well?
Yeah, he starts aging again.
Yeah.
And then you have the main police character in both scripts. In Romero's draft, it's Paonessa. And in Garris's draft, I think it's Powers. He's in the car with Helen in both drafts. He's driving her in his squad car, and Imhotep's in the back of the paddy wagon. Is that racist of me to say that?
What, paddy wagon?
Yeah.
No, that's a huge term.
Yeah. It just feels weird, especially after Paddy O'Bannon.
Oh, yeah.
And we know how much Romero loves the Irish.
Well, that's what he says.
But, okay, so what happens is that, and this is actually kind of a cool, almost sort of action-y scene, is that he starts seizing out in the back of the wagon, and the cop's like, oh crap, and then he goes to help him out because he thinks something's wrong with him, and then he touches his skin on accident, and that's enough to help him start becoming whole again. And so, and like he just bursts out of the back of the wagon, and he basically makes the squad car crash. Now, in the Romero draft, Paonessa survives, and there's this big battle between Garris and the cops at the museum, which is gone in the Garris draft, presumably for budgetary reasons. But in the Garris draft, Paonessa burns alive in the car, and Helen's badly hurt. Imhotep pulls her out, runs back off to the museum, and in the Garris draft, there's this bullshit bit where he gives her a healing kiss.
Oh, yeah.
Where I'm like, did you restore her memories with that kiss, Superman?
Yeah, it was very, very cheesy in that kind of way.
Very Superman, too. And so, in the Romero draft, he stops off to get that knife from the desk, which he could have gotten at any time. And so he goes to they go to the tomb. And he begins the ritual, he gets her to drink the blood. He has her wear the necklace, and he says, this is the twist which really sold me on this story, if only it was written a bit differently, is that it's established at the beginning that that one of them has to die to end this pact.
Yeah.
That either he can kill her and become immortal, or she can kill him and he'll die for good. And you think throughout this whole script that he's going to kill her and that he's just an evil bastard. He's conflicted, but he's an evil bastard, but then he wants her to kill him and release him from this curse because he realized that Set's immortality is bullshit. And I got to that point and I went, you know what, I wasn't sure about this Romero because of all the annoying things, but slow clap.
Honestly, yeah. As a reveal on its own, it was okay, but I just think everything around it needed to be written better. But I can definitely appreciate the reveal was quite clever.
But I think the Garris draft, it works better there. Because you don't have the fucking shit relationship drama.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, to talk about the relationship drama just a bit before we end talking about these drafts, I like the idea that she has issues with her relationships because there's this part of her that's missing, and that she needs to resolve that before she can move on. That's a good idea for a character. Just don't use it to have characters bitch and moan at each other for the entire draft about their problems.
Yeah.
Because it's not interesting. It's just really typical character drama.
Yeah, and I think we've established that Romero doesn't do character drama very well.
Except in Martin.
Yeah.
we get to this ending, and Garris shows up after having pointlessly killed that one guy in the Romero draft.
Yeah.
And he shows up, and he says, and Imhotep says, "Friend, we are going to be free from this curse finally." But then Garris looks at the Set statue, and you get the idea that Set is not liking what Imhotep's plan is here. And so he influences Garris to turn on Imhotep.
Which, again, I appreciated as a bit of a twist.
Yeah, it was a good twist, and I like Garris versus Imhotep is an awesome concept, because you never got to see those mummies cross over. Hell, the mummy never crossed over with the other monsters in the original universe.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you count some of the more bizarre spin-offs.
Well, no, actually not. Well, Monster Squad, I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, in the original universe, that's because the other monsters took place in roughly 1940s, but the fairy tale version. And as we established earlier, the Garris mummy movies took place in the fucking 70s and the 90s.
Yeah.
So they would have needed time travel to cross them over.
So basically, he's Captain America of the Universal Monsters.
I understood that reference. That quip worked, yes. But no, okay, so the way this goes down is slightly different. It's majorly different in the Romero draft. In the Romero draft, Mike and a ton of cops show up, and there's this huge fucking fight scene between the cops and Garris. And it's actually pretty cool, because they're using all these different items at the different museum exhibits.
Oh, yeah.
And they just fuck each other up. But, like, Garris gets, like...
It was kind of similar to how the fight in the Sommers film goes, where they're just picking up weapons from the side of the, from the walls and stuff.
Yeah, a little bit. This is the R-rated version. The R-rated version.
Yeah, exactly.
See, this was what would happen, because you know how you love to complain about the bloodlessness of Returns.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
But yeah, but it would have been a pretty cool scene. Sadly, it's probably gone because of budgetary reasons.
Oh, yeah.
In the Garris draft, it's a little weak, because Mike shows up with a gun and shoots Imhotep in the face, and you see it heal up, and that just makes me think of that one trailer shot for the Wolverine, where he gets cut across the face and it heals. And then basically what happens is that Garris in his fight with the cops in the Romero version and, like, the ensuing struggle in the Garris version loses one of his stone eyes. And in the Romero version, actually, he's burned down to a crisp.
Yeah.
And he keeps going. But no, they're running away from Garris, and they run into the burial chamber, and he does the sand thing, the lizard's egg thing, to seal the door, why that's still intact, I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
That just broke my brain trying to explain that. And so they're sealed inside the burial chamber, and Imhotep finally convinces her to stab him. He's like, "That's the only way you could save this man, because I know you love him just as much as you love me."
Right, yeah.
Which is a surprisingly selfless thing from Imhotep, considering the other incarnation.
Yeah, but again, I think that's helped the character for me.
Yeah,
Yeah, go on.
No, it's a nice spin on the character. It makes him more human.
Exactly, it makes him more human, but a lot more selfless, as if he's, like, learning to be a lot more selfless, rather.
And so they're fighting Garris, and after Imhotep gets stabbed, like, the tomb starts kind of falling apart, and it collapses on Garris, and then his hand pops out from the rubble, and the fight continues. Now, in the Romero draft, Helen defeats him by pouring some wax on him and stamping the sign of Isis on him, which stops him. In the Garris draft, they just have to knock his other eye out.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a little eh.
It was a little bit too easy, really.
But I like how they go back in to look for Imhotep's corpse, and it's just the clothes with, like, nothing in them. And then the Bobird goes and flies off into the sky.
He has become one with the Force.
Yes, and he can come back in.
Yeah.
The Force is one, and the Force is with me.
Oh, God, yeah.
But no, I like that. I thought that was a surprisingly, kind of upbeat but bittersweet kind of mummy ending.
Yeah.
I like that's a good bad guy. I just think that was a clever thing on Romero's part.
I mean, it referenced the mythology to the extent that I liked that. It wasn't too clever. It wasn't too referencey, and it made a lot of sense.
But yeah, okay, that's these drafts, and I think they're good. They both could use some polishing.
Yes.
Like, maybe mix and match different bits and pieces of both, but you'd have had a pretty solid movie, and I think it would have been looked back on pretty well.
Yeah, and I think as well people would have appreciated the fact that it referenced, both sides of the original Mummy stuff.
Indeed. And I think if Romero had gotten his version made, I think his career might have, stayed on track. He wouldn't have had to go back to zombies.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it's kind of a shame because the guy can be very good, but he can only get the money to make the same old shit, and now he can't even get the money to do that. Like, as bad as his movies got, that's still a little sad.
Yeah.
But, okay, so what happened with, because we already covered what happened to the Romero version, what happened with the Garris version is that he was meeting, they got the green light, he was meeting with, the effects people, Steve Johnson, who's a big effects guy, works for XFX. They did a bunch of concept art and were working all the stuff out. He was interviewing actors. He was location scouting in British Columbia, I think. But what happened is that, and this is a little typical, a little nod, is that there was a regime change at Universal, and Sid Sheinberg was on his way out. As part of his golden parachute, as they call it, he was given his own production company called The Bubble Factory.
Right, okay.
So it consists of farts. But, and he was part of this deal, he was given any project he wanted, and he chose The Mummy. And so he decided in order to, give this thing some prestige, he wanted a big writer to come in and give it a rewrite. But no writer would do it. And so he decided he had a big A-list director to do it, and that got Mick Garris fired. No A-list director wanted to do this. So that just killed the project.
Right.
And the way Garris describes it is that basically he was the chef who sneaked into the kitchen, peed into the soup, and ran out. So Sid Sheinberg is kind of Tyler Durden.
Fair enough. Don't ask about the cream of mushroom soup.
Go ahead, tell him. Okay, but here, according to this article, the Bubble Factory kept toying with The Mummy after that, and they even talked to the to producers who were attached to the previous versions. And okay, here's a quote from James Jacks, who was one of the producers. He said, "They started telling us that they wanted to do a kind of Starman with a mummy. They had their eye on the Millennium and wanted to do this uplifting thing with the Mummy being the new Messiah. We said, but that's not a horror movie." They said they didn't think The Mummy should be a horror movie.
Okay. Different.
A unique take.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it's shit, but I would love to read that script. If it was even a script.
Yeah.
Starman with a mummy. Jeff Bridges is Imhotep. That would be fucking awesome. He's holding the goblet full of blood. We got a beverage here, man. And so basically the Bubble Factory said, hey, you guys, you had the project first, so they gave it back to Jim Jackson, Sean Daniels. What happened here is that the next draft happened, and he said he had and Jack says, I had a very close relationship with Kevin. I'm going to mispronounce his name because it's a French name, Jarre, who is a truly great writer. He wrote Glory and Tombstone. Those are the two things he's known for, and a bunch of other movies. Now, there's some history of Tombstone. He was supposed to direct it, but he got kicked off by the Suits, and then Kurt Russell ghost directed the movie.
Right.
With the guy who did it, and it was a mess. I've not actually seen all of Tombstone. But that he had also done a version of Dracula, which is what basically got him the job to kind of work on this movie.
Right.
Which I've heard it hews fairly closely to Stoker, but it was written like around the early 90s, and the Coppola version making it into production first killed that off.
Okay.
Now, I'd love to read his take on Dracula.
That certainly sounds interesting.
Yeah, and so what happened here was that I believe Jarre, he wrote a treatment, and he got his friend Lloyd von Viel, if that's how you say his name, who wrote The Bride, the late 80s Bride of Frankenstein, with Sting as Frankenstein and the Kurgan as the Frankenstein monster.
Right.
Or Mr. Krabs, depending on your age range. Yes, Clancy Brown is the voice of Mr. Krabs. That's the weirdest thing you will hear tonight. And so they put a script together, and now what makes this script interesting is that these two writers got a story credit on the Stephen Sommers film. I'm gonna have to kind of call bullshit on that.
Yeah, I can't really see why.
Because it must have been a contractual thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only reason, because there's no legitimate written reason why that would make any sense.
Yes, and yeah, which is just odd. It was probably a contractual thing. But I mean, if they could get a story credit, so could all of the other writers, because bits and pieces from those scripts ended up in the Stephen Sommers one. And what's interesting about this script is that for a long time, because of, where Stephen Sommers kind of went after the first Mummy, it wasn't uncommon to see people speculating that the guys with the story credit were the real geniuses behind the movie. Which is not unfair considering Returns and Van Helsing and G.I. Joe. But as it turns out, the script is so different from the film that really, honestly, Stephen Sommers is the true genius here. And I know that sounds really weird.
I mean, a stopwatch is right twice a day.
It's a broken clock is right twice a day.
The same thing.
A stopwatch isn't broken.
No, a stopped watch.
Oh, a stopwatch.
Yeah.
Okay. But no, the main contribution they made was making this a period piece set in the 1920s, which is the big thing that carried over into the Sommers film.
Yes.
And so the story of this script is, it's set in the 1920s, and we get the briefest of prologues in ancient Egypt, which to me is the best part of the script because it sets up a nice atmosphere of mystery.
Yeah, it's all very glimpses and shots that you're not too sure what's happening at the time, and it expands upon that later, which I thought was quite clever.
Yes, and the first glimpse you get, and which is the one you get for most of it, is it's a man we don't see stabbing a woman we don't see, and it's an unnaturally large torrent of blood. Yes,
and it's like, I think that's kind of supposed to be like, artist impression almost.
Yes, almost. And I like that because it has me questioning, what the hell is this? Because that's not really something from any of the movies, or really any of the other scripts, although between these three scripts, I mean, there's enough for you to once again say, just stop stabbing things.
Yeah. But to be honest, though, the way it was shot, it kind of sounded like something Brian Fuller would do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it feels like a Hannibal scene.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, man, a Brian Fuller mummy movie. I mean, he's playing with mythology and American gods right now, so...
Well, who knows?
But yeah, but that was an interesting moment, and also it reminds me of, because there's a bit you can see in the trailers for the new movie, where you see Aminette stabbing a guy in his sleep.
Yeah.
Did Alex Kurtzman look at this?
Possibly. But who knows?
The storyline is that you get this kind of half-assed group of archaeologists who are Tim Hilton, who is a bland milquetoast who's occasionally really silly.
And he's kind of shown as being a bit foppish.
The characterizations are a little inconsistent.
Yeah.
You have his fiancée, Connie, who is an annoying bitch who is just saying horrible things, treating everybody like shit, and then halfway through her character gets kind of rebooted.
Yeah, but that doesn't really redeem the fact that she's just a horrible character.
And then you get Brian O'Connell. Yes, this is where the O'Connell name comes from.
Brian, not so much. That doesn't work for me.
It's funny because, I mean, if you took the L's off the end and put it in an R, his name would be Brian O'Connor, which is Paul Walker's character from Fast and the Furious.
Yeah.
But no, he's an ex-Foreign Legion member who's got a troubled past.
Which again, the Foreign Legion thing, that's again something in the Sommers thing, which I appreciated.
And then he's got a dark and troubled past. He's done bad things, but he's got a heart of gold.
Well, he's really not Brendan Fraser's character at all.
No, he's every tortured anti-hero ever.
Yeah, it's just not fun at all, whereas in fact, Brendan Fraser is actually fun.
They give him a couple of conflicting backstories, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then you have the archaeologist Hendry, who's British.
That's it. That's his entire character. British.
And he's the most likable of the four because he's the only one who's not a complete... Because, okay, Connie's a bitch.
Yeah.
Tim is really bland. And O'Connell is just a mopey, emo fuck.
Pretty much.
Who sits around just moaning about shit for most of this thing. Which would be fine if they set up his World War I backstory earlier, but they don't.
No.
And they make sure you know he's a badass from the second he steps in. But yeah, Hendry is the only one who's a normal human being of the group.
Yeah.
But so what happened is that they found this tablet which is leading them to this place called the Valley of the Seven Jackals, where they think Ankhsenamen, this important priestess from the past, has been buried. So they get there, they dig it up, and they find this gigantic mummy whose name is Garris. So yeah, no Imhotep in this script.
Yeah, which was surprising, actually, how it took like the O'Connell name and got rid of the Imhotep name. It was quite strange how they did that.
Actually, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. Stephen Sommers kept the O'Connell name and dumped Garris. Oh
yeah, no, that's what I mean. I mean, in this script they took out Imhotep, whereas he comes back later and they just remove Garris, and it was kind of weird.
Yeah, this one seems to be more of a Garris or Carice as he's sometimes called, depending on what scene.
Yeah.
It's inconsistent across all the movies. Or Garris. It's kind of, I kind of doubt that's a real Egyptian name.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Might be a good idea to check that.
Yeah, do some research before we record. But no, they find his mummy, and there's these native tribesmen who are watching them from a distance, who resurrect the mummy, and it basically turns into a big brutal thing of the mummy just slaughtering people, and it's interwoven with them figuring out this storyline from the past, which ends up being a reincarnation drama, which is the most complex version of it ever.
Yeah.
In any version of the mummy. Even less complex than in The Mummy Returns, which is saying something. Because The Mummy Returns, it's just a lot of convoluted nonsense.
Yeah, it's just a convoluted nonsense to just expand it and create another fucking sequel, basically.
Yeah, and whereas here, it's actually, they actually go into a lot of depth about what all this means. But it honestly gets to a point where I don't even understand why the mummy actually needs to be part of this story.
Yeah.
Like, he's fairly superfluous to the actual reincarnation plot.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, okay, to go through this thing point by point, we get that kind of creepy intro, and I like how it goes to a montage of all the different Egyptian monuments under the moonlight. And the tablet, which points the direction to the tomb, is written by a guy called Ioannos the Greek. Which I'm still trying to figure out how they wrote out a Greek name in hieroglyphs.
I might have mentioned this before we started recording, but yeah, hieroglyphics are not as easy to be read as they seem in movies.
Yeah, and then it cuts to the 1920s, where Hilton, Hendry, and Connie are with the head of the Antiquities Service, which I believe it is a historical fact that it was run by the French.
Yes.
Which is odd, but even though Egypt was governed by the British for God knows how long. It's one of those weird things that is so strange it has to be true. And so they're trying to convince this guy to give them permission to dig there, and Connie seems to be doing her level best to just try and sabotage it almost, because she's complaining about how she doesn't like being in Egypt. She finds all this stuff boring. She basically flat out insults the Antiquities guy.
Yeah, she does.
Okay, you're introducing this character like this. And here's the thing with this script, right? Is that if these characters in the first 30 pages were rendered somewhat more likable, the script would work way better.
Yes.
Because she's just horrible for the entire first half.
Yeah, there's no reason to actually like her as a main character.
But no, she's no Evie.
No, oh Christ, no.
Like, fuck, I almost preferred the Maria Bello Evie to this. Ugh. I mean, she's just such a horrible bitch.
Yeah. By the way, this is like my sudden interruption, but turns out the name Garris is actually a Greek name. And that actually would make sense for this, considering they're from the late period where the Greeks had shown up already. Exactly. It's a Greek name that means charm, grace, or kindness.
That does not fit this character.
No, exactly. But yeah, so there you go.
He sure as shit ain't charming, graceful, or kind.
Yeah.
He's actually quite the bastard when you get the full backstory.
Yeah. But believe it or not, it comes from Carites, I think it's pronounced, who was the goddess of charm.
But no, actually, fair play on them. They picked a period where that name would make sense.
Yeah, so I think that's actually a plus for the script. I'll give it that one.
Yeah, it is a well-researched script for the most part.
Yeah.
But okay, so they get the permission, only it turns out the guy they need to manage their diggers has got appendicitis or something. Something like that. And so they need to go find a new guy, so of course they send the scholar out to go find him.
Yeah.
Which Hendry in this script, my God, they keep putting him in ridiculous situations. But like, okay, he's in a Casbah looking for work, and he runs into O'Connell, whom he gets off a boat, and he steps on this guy's foot to keep him from robbing him. So you know he's a badass. And then so O'Connell proves he knows Arabic, and he knows more than this other dumbass who's a British scoundrel, I think they call him, and I just imagined him with a Cockney accent. Yeah,
well, I imagined a basically British version of Omid Jalili's character from The Mummy.
Exactly.
You know?
And then we get the backstory on O'Connell, where he was in the French Foreign Legion.
Yeah.
But he was kicked out for savagery.
Which, they never really explain what that means.
They do explain what that means. It's because he had an encounter with bandits, and because he couldn't take their bodies back for the ransom.
Oh, really?
For the reward, he cut their heads off.
Did I miss that?
You must have skimmed.
I think I told him, wow. I apologize.
Yeah, he
I totally
cut
missed
their
that.
he cut their heads off, and because it coincided with a political thing where they were discussing the Algerian question, he got drummed out of the military for that.
Oh, no, that's right. No, I remember reading this now, because when I read that, you know what I thought about? I thought about the Colonel in The Prophecy.
Yeah, exactly.
Who keeps like Korean people's faces in a suitcase. I do remember reading that now. Wow, I totally blanked on that.
Yeah, and he and that's just kind of ironic because anyone who knows their history knows the French treated the Algerians like absolute shit.
Yeah.
Like, just watch even well into the 20th century, just watch the Battle of Algiers, which is a docudrama about how they treated, about how shitty both the freedom fighters and the French were.
Yeah, it's not good history.
It's really nasty.
It really is.
It's a nice and balanced picture too. It's not too romantic for either side, but yeah, so because of that, and we get a whole completely different backstory for O'Connell later on, where he found out he fought in World War I and he hasn't found himself yet or something, which would have been a fine backstory if we got it here. Yes. But no, apparently he found himself and he missed the opportunity to follow Elliot Spencer and open the box.
Yes. It was, I think, with his backstory, it would have been a better idea if they outlined who he was and what he's like, just so we can actually understand him a bit better, because throughout the film, he kind of flip-flops between different modes, badass or mopey, you know?
I am one of the damned, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so fucking 90s crap.
And then there's a moment way later on, which we'll get to, where the badass and the mopey, like, collide into a colossal moment of stupid.
Yeah.
Well, two colossal moments of stupid.
Yeah.
So, okay, Henry brings him back to the boat. Tim is happy, Connie is not, because she hates everybody.
Oh, yeah, she's never fucking happy.
It's like, oh, he's an animal. Now, she does have a built-in reason to dislike him because of the reincarnation plot.
But we don't know that yet, so it's still... It's like making her a bitch and making us hate her for no real reason.
I have to wonder if Kevin Jarre's treatment had make this character a hateful bitch. But okay, so they get on the riverboat. She's a constant bitch during dinner. Like, these guys are enthusiastic. They're doing what they love. And guess what? Her fiancé brought her with him on a trip to a foreign country when in 1920 whatever, he could have just been like, nope, I'm chaining you to the stove, bitch.
Yeah.
I'm like, you got a good woman. And what's so horrible about their relationship is that later on in the script, they have a few decent moments together where you understand their relationship.
Yeah, they are capable of writing her as a rational, interesting character. They just don't.
And they do have a certain amount of affection for each other, but that gets disrupted by the reincarnation thing.
Yeah.
But just for the first 30, 40 pages of this, she's just horrible to everybody.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that they're on the boat, and this really horribly cheesy bit happens, where they're both having nightmares about the stabbing incident from ancient Egypt, so these two are reincarnated.
Yeah.
O'Connell and Connie. Oh god, the shitty Tumblr shipping names you can make from that. They meet at the railing, and then they make out, and they fuck. And he just starts talking nonsense about finding something. I'm like, dude, you are really shit at the pillow talk.
Yeah. No wonder she leaves.
It's like, my god, when I can take Brendan Fraser more seriously as a badass, like, I could buy him as a suave ladies man more than this dude. This dude's just like, oh, I'm gonna go listen to My Chemical Romance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's also down to, like I said, it kind of depends on who they wanted to play the character, because I think acting alone could have saved some parts of this guy.
Okay, so they fuck, and she's like, oh no, nothing happened. And it seems like every time she sees him for like the next 25 fucking pages, he's like, nothing happened.
Yeah.
Which comes back to bite her in the ass later on. But, so they get to the valley. And he's like, oh, and Tim's like, I don't know where to start. And Henry's like, well, we got to start on the western side so that they can face the sunrise. Because but where do we dig? And O'Connell's like, hey, we divide this off into a grid and we keep digging. And so that leads to this whole bullshit thing where he's like, it's like we all came together via fate. Which then sadly turns out to be true.
And it was a bit too on the nose to just outright state that, frankly.
Yes, and okay, so and while they're doing this, there's these 3 members of the local tribe called the Abia, who have supposedly been here since the days of the pharaohs. And eventually O'Connell goes to kind of negotiate with them, and they seem fairly reasonable.
At first, at least.
Yeah, at first, and then they just go mustache twirly for no reason.
Yeah.
And so you have the leader, who you should I give it away now? Because it ends up amounting to fucking nothing. Turns out he's Ardith Bey.
For no real reason. There's no, it's just a reference, really.
I mean, yeah, it's a reference to the fact that was the mummy's alias in the original movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yeah, they used it for a different character in the Sommers films, but he was a character. He's not this walking plot device. Okay, so there's 3 of them. There's the main guy, there's another guy, and there's a 14-year-old girl.
Yeah.
That detail's actually important. And so they say, hey, we'll let you dig here as long as you pay us off. And so O'Connell's, cool, we have a deal. And then while they're digging for the tomb, there's this awkward moment at night where O'Connell is watching Connie's silhouette while she's bathing.
Yeah.
And then it's awkward enough, and then Tim walks up and he's like pleased with himself over this. He's like, yeah, you're perving on my fiancé, ain't that cool, basically?
Yeah, I don't know. Unless he was doing the whole look at my hot wife.
So he's played by Paul W.S. Anderson.
That was what I was going for, yes.
Only he's not British in this script, he's American.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't understand his character at all, because sometimes he's rational, sometimes he's bland, sometimes he's weird, sometimes he's a man-child, sometimes he's an alcoholic, which is completely out of nowhere later on.
Oh yeah, the alcohol moment, yeah.
But yeah, he's just weird. So basically, they find the tomb. Long story short, they dig down to the door. Connie's like acting all freaky, going, no, don't go down there, and that's the most understandable moment that character has in the entire thing.
Yeah.
Up to this point. And so they find out that it's been sealed on both opening and on the inside.
Yeah.
On the inside and the outside. And the seal on the outside has the name Garris on it. And so they break open the door and they find O'Connell decides he's going to go in first to test the place out, structurally speaking, because there's like cracks forming in the ceiling.
Yeah.
And so he goes in and he finds a corpse laying there next to Door, the guy who apparently sealed himself shut inside and then let himself die. And he's drawn to this corpse and he touches it and it dissolves. And he passes out. And then meanwhile, Tim and Hendry are just like, we'll leave you here. We're going to go further into the tomb. And they find in the inner chamber a little platform in the middle with an inner sarcophagus on it. And they went, oh crap, this is kind of heavy. Let's go get O'Connell to help us out.
Yeah.
And so they go find him. He speaks some words in ancient Greek while he's unconscious. They wake his ass up and they get him to open the coffin. And also, by the way, on the walls, there's all these sorts of it's described as being unusual Egyptian art. And there's like images of Set.
Yeah, they're big on Set still.
Yes. Well, he is the evil god.
Yeah.
But yeah, and there's like a piece of one of the inscriptions is translated where it says something the virgin's blood for Garris. And so they pop open the coffin, and he's all moldy and decaying, but they mention he's very, very big. He's 7 feet tall.
Yes. Which I liked. I liked the idea of just this massive, mummy wandering about.
Kind of like the Christopher Lee version.
Yeah, exactly.
I just gotta wonder, 7 foot tall people in ancient Egypt? That's kind of odd.
Yeah, but it kind of works for the, imposing nature of the character.
But yeah, they were all disappointed because they didn't find the tomb they were looking for, and it's kind of funny if they looked just a little bit closer, they would have found it. You find out later.
Yeah.
But so they have the mummy in the tent, and Kendry has made some tracings of the wall paintings. He's examining those around the fire and whatnot, and then Connie freaks out, runs out into the desert. O'Connell goes after her. Oh, also, the sarcophagus was flanked by 4 jackal statues, which is important for later.
Yeah, they make a big deal about the whole thing with that.
And one of the images on the wall is 7 jackals, because of the valley name, devouring a scroll.
Yeah. It's a bit too much for me. Like I said, on the nose.
But no, so what happens here is that as O'Connell is tracking down Connie, is that the 3 Abia, they sneak into the tent, they pour water over Garris.
Yeah, it's like they're just rehydrating.
I guess they figured Tanna-leaf tea was too silly, so let's use water.
I had to read that several times because I'm like, seriously? You just rehydrated him like a pot noodle?
It's like he's like the opposite of the aliens from Signs.
Yeah.
But no, to complete the, because they need the virgin blood, the 14-year-old girl sticks her hand into the watery mass. And oh yeah, the coffin was also packed with sand.
Mm.
And so, her life force, I guess, is sucked out, and that causes Garris to reconstitute.
Mm.
And what happens is that they flee the tent. Tim sees them. He sees that she is like all wrinkled and old looking, and I guess she dies.
I guess. It's never really stated, though.
And he says, "Hey, Hendry, something weird is going on. Let's get out of here. Let's find O'Connell."
Mm.
So he goes and rides off, and Hendry is like, "Oh no, my tracings," and he goes into the tent. And he's grabbing his tracings, and as he's doing that, Garris wakes up.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of a scary moment.
Yeah, the way it's written is actually quite well done. The descriptions of everything.
With his big hollow eye sockets.
Yes.
And you get the idea that what happens is that he goes to Hendry and then rips his eyes out and then places them into his sockets.
Yeah.
And this is confirmed, and this is like shown as, you see him moving towards Hendry, then you see a close-up of Hendry's specific color of eyes in Garris's sockets.
Mm.
And then later on you find out that Hendry has been blinded. Now it's slightly ruined by the fact that the eyes are described as being askew. Mm. So I'm just imagining him having crazy double and triple vision from this.
Oh, it's just the idea that as a mummy wandering around with like boss-eyedness.
And they're violet eyes, which is an interesting color.
I don't think that's a thing.
I've heard it's a thing, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I've never really heard that. But
you could go do the research.
Yeah.
But no, I think also that's a bit that Stephen Sommers took.
Yeah, I was going to say that is actually one of the more creepy moments in the film that worked really well. The way the guy was just taking, I think he took his eyes and his tongue out.
Yeah, and his tongue out. And I should mention though, because they don't do the tongue thing in this. But he actually does talk a few times. What's really weird is that his voice is described as being like words that don't make sense for sounds.
Yeah.
Like it's like they describe it as like texture.
Yeah, the way I kind of figured it was like a mixture between supernatural sounds added to the, he's trying to talk with rotten vocal cords. Yeah,
but in the But yeah, that's why but the tongue thing I bring up because that originally came from Garris. Because in the mummy's hand, it's mentioned that they cut out his tongue so that his curses wouldn't offend the gods.
Right, okay.
And then they just show them wrapping up, like, it's a big close-up of them wrapping up his face with just his eyes staring out. It's really quite a creepy image.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't use the long shot from the stock footage because it was obviously Boris Karloff. So yeah, they run out into the desert and they hide in a box canyon. And O'Connell tells Tim, go find the Egyptian army, which is somewhere nearby, because we think we're under attack from the Abia tribesmen, which is sort of something Stephen Sommers added, except that's not what actually happens to the camp here.
Right, yeah.
And now I have to bring up a point. If you didn't want this tomb desecrated, why did you waste time just letting them dig? Why didn't you just sneak into camp, cut the 4 principals' throats in their sleep, and then run off? It would have saved so much time and effort.
Yeah, exactly. It was all just an excuse to have a movie, because there's no reason for them to do what they did. They would have stopped them as soon as they saw them, really, if that was their priority. But no, they have to get a movie out.
But no, but is the supernatural mummy man really necessary?
Yeah.
It makes sense in the Sommers film why the Magi don't succeed, because there's many, many armed men there.
Exactly, yeah, and they were just fought off.
But here it's like, no, we're gonna try and be coy about it and then resurrect the supernatural mummy man. You could maybe ask politely for them not to open the tomb. Like in the Hammer version.
Oh, by the way,
yes.
Once more, some research. True violet-colored eyes occur only due to albinism.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there you go.
I was right, it was a real thing.
It's a real thing, but he would have to be an albino.
But okay, so they hear that what sounds like an attack on the camp, but you find out later that what happened is that Garris woke up, and he basically just kills the shit out of the diggers. He tears them to pieces, and then pieces them back together, because he has this weird Frankenstein theme going on in this.
Yeah, he likes to create Frankenstein zombie things.
Which is just weird.
Yeah, not really... it doesn't make much sense, because that's not a mummy. That's got nothing to do with Egyptian mythology. It's just random.
Because I kind of get what they're trying to do here, is that they're trying to make him a villain and not just the big muscle. But but I don't think what they do really works, because he does a lot of things, but he only does them once, and they don't really do much.
Yeah.
But apparently Karis just wandered the fuck off into the desert after that, because the Egyptian army shows up, and they find Hendry, who is somehow still alive.
Oh yeah, he's just wandering around without any eyes.
Because he wanders off out of the camp and finds them in the canyon.
Yeah.
But yeah, he says, I can still see him, the mummy. But okay, to get to the point, the Egyptian army's like, well, this is fucked. And they're like, well, this is weird. And so it cuts to, like, several months later, and the rest of the script takes place in New York. And it becomes, basically from here on out, they hang out in Tim's townhouse, discuss shit, figure it out, and then go someplace, have a random mummy encounter, they roll and they escape. And
then it's rinse and repeat, basically.
It's rinse and repeat through the whole thing, and just different stuff happens. I don't know really how to go about this. I will say this second half is much better than the first half, because this is when the characters mostly start acting normally. And you actually get character motivation for Tim, because you find out his father is this practical businessman who's not impressed with his scholarly pursuits.
Right, yeah.
I'm like, it's all fairly typical and really doesn't go anywhere because his father disappears after 2 scenes.
Doesn't he die?
No, he leaves. He fucks off and leaves.
He just leaves. Oh, right, I didn't know.
He fucks off and leaves for Palm Springs.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and it's like, it doesn't go anywhere, but at least we finally get something resembling characterization for Tim. But okay, so basically, apparently Connie and Tim have gotten there early, and O'Connell and Hendry are just showing up. And then we find out that there's this bogus quack Egyptology institution called the Applegate Place, which is on Central Park, and they have a mummy in the collection who is exceedingly tall and in the care of some mysterious Egyptian named Ardeth Bey.
No guesses for what's going on there.
No, although I'm not really sure what they were trying to prove there.
Yeah, I don't know.
Also, it's established that it takes a while to establish it with both of them, but both Connie and O'Connell have the same red marks on their hands, which were shown in the carvings on the walls.
Oh, yeah. But it's very minimal at first, but then it gets more and more referenced over and over again. But again, that's in Mummy Returns as well, to a certain extent.
But I think it works better here.
Oh, yeah, because
this just overemphasizes it to a point where it gets silly, but the story here works better than that does, because it's not shoehorned in.
Yes.
But no, they go to this Egyptology Institute, and sure enough, the mummy that's laying out in the room is Karis, and there's this overly elaborate build-up to the reveal that Ardeth Bey is the Abiya headman. He's just like, oh hey, nice seeing you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really get what he's doing here.
I know, because I was reading that scene and it's like, okay, the way they reacted is like, I know who you are, I know you know who I am, but let's keep going with this shit anyway. It's
like that scene, it's like the fucking birthday party scene in Batman Begins.
Yeah.
Only nowhere near as well written as that. And we don't get Christian Bale going full drunken rant on people.
Otherwise known as Christian Bale on set.
I don't think Karis trashes any lights in this, sadly. But no, they find him, and he's just like, hey, and then things just go completely tits up because one of the female guests is like, I want to touch the mummy. And apparently Karis doesn't react well to being touched, so he grabs her, puts his mouth on her nose, and sucks her brains out because, as we all know, the Egyptians pull the brain out through the nose.
Yeah.
I don't know why he did that specifically. It doesn't do anything. He never does it again.
Yeah, he never does it again. It doesn't do anything, and it's just random because, he took the guy's eyes because he needed eyes. There's no reason why he would need a brain, really.
Especially since he didn't have his brains removed.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's just, I guess these writers were playing their VHS copy of From Beyond.
Possibly, yeah.
But no, it's just random, and because it's not like it gives him strength because he eats corpses to gain strength, apparently.
Yeah.
Which is something we never actually see him do. It just kind of happens.
Yeah, it's just implied.
And then Karis comes out, like, the guy who was with the woman, pisses himself and pukes up all over himself, which is way too much of an Evil Dead moment for this.
Oh, yeah.
And then Karis comes stumbling out of the room, and this guy bless this guy for being a badass, tries to fight him with a fire poker, and Karis just rips his arm off, and everybody starts fleeing. And Ardeth Bey is like, what the fuck, Karis? This wasn't part of the deal.
Oh yeah, he just completely loses control of him. It's like, why did you bring him here? What the hell's the point of all this?
And yes, for all this build-up for Ardith Bay,
yeah,
he's in 2 more scenes, and in the 3rd scene, he fucking dies.
Yeah, he gets killed by Karis again. Not again,
yeah.
He gets killed by him.
Yeah, again. But Karis sees Connie and knows that this is his lost love, apparently, and starts chasing her. But she gets away into the park, and this is one of the dumbest fucking things. Karis cannot move in moonlight or sunlight.
That pretty much makes it almost impossible
to take him seriously.
Oh, well, yeah, it's just, he can't move in the day, simple as that. So it has to be at night, but it has to be a really cloudy night.
And even during the new moon, he can't move when there's no goddamn moonlight.
Yeah, he basically, his only weakness is a lack of cloud. Well, not his only weakness, but you know what I mean.
I don't even know why they're even worried about this guy getting them. If they just fucking hole up,
yeah,
go to fucking the tropics or something, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that it needs to be, absolute direct sunlight.
But that's not really the way they say it.
Hence why I said you could argue. But
yeah, but
the way it's actually portrayed as well, it doesn't seem to be the case. So it's very ambiguous and just stupid.
Once again, he's not unlike the aliens in Signs.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I'm saying that as someone who actually likes Signs, so that's saying something.
Yeah.
But alright, so they're like, well, oh shit, there's a mummy after us. And this is when Tim's father just books it, because he's like, hey, there's a maniac after us. Just books it to Palm Springs.
Yeah, he's like, I'm out of here.
And one of the things I like is that after the Institute thing happens, O'Connell is actually really smart in how he handles the police.
Mm.
And that he says, it was just a guy wrapped up like a mummy. It's a crazy person dressed like a mummy.
Mm.
Even though he knows that's not the case, but he doesn't want the police to think he's crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
I wish more characters in horror movies would do this kind of shit. I mean, honestly, seriously.
Yeah.
Why does nobody in horror movies ever think ahead about this kind of thing and just make themselves look bad? Sorry, I'm on...
I think that's as well is down to the writing as well, because they don't think about consequences a lot of the time when they write that in horror movies.
Well, no, it's because it gives them an easy secondary antagonist.
Exactly.
The authorities.
It's a very easy way to continue the plot, and I think that's one of the issues. So in a way, it's quite clever and progressive in the writing style, I guess.
The only film I really feel like that completely works in is Friday the 13th Part 6.
Right, yeah.
Because it's like, they already have reason to believe Tommy Jarvis is crazy because he spent a fucking decade in a mental institute.
Right.
And let's be honest, they should be expecting Jason to come back at this point.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so that happens, and then Henry is looking at his tracings, and he's not looking at them because he's blind. But they examine his tracings and they figure out, because it says something about the dead moving in Karis' presence, and from that he somehow deduces that he's hiding out in the cemetery.
Yeah, I don't know how they deduced that, really.
And then this is where Henry reveals that he's figured out that Connie, O'Connell, and Karis were brought together by ISIS for some sort of reckoning. And he figures out that the scroll in the image is the thing that will reveal everything to them. Now, it takes a stupidly long time for them to figure out that the bits of the scroll are inside the jackal statues.
Yeah, well, also that is needlessly drawn out as well, because it's not just in one jackal statue; it's in all 7.
It's like Christ, like a National Treasure MacGuffin.
It really is.
A Pirates of the Caribbean MacGuffin.
Yes.
Well, okay, so they look at the Institute on the map, and they look at for the nearest church, which is Trinity Church, which was in National Treasure.
Yeah.
And they discover, he's hiding in this mausoleum. And so basically O'Connell and Hendry go there by themselves to look for Karis, because you want to bring the blind guy as backup.
I know. It makes no bloody sense.
And they don't tell Hilton and Connie anything. I understand not telling Connie because, she's the mummy's target. But why not just tell them what you're doing so they don't get suspicious and follow you to the church? And so they go into the tomb, and there's this weird thing where it's implied that, the corpses in the graves are coming to life.
Oh, yeah, yeah. All the graves are empty.
That's later, but there's a corpse scratching the inside of the coffin in the mausoleum where they think Karis will be hiding out.
Which was actually kind of creepy, to be honest.
But it's like, it's so random.
It's random, but I kind of liked it. Just this idea of hearing this scratching underneath.
But the creepy part for me is there's all these dead animal bits from Garris just tearing them to pieces.
But again, this was kind of used in The Mummy Returns, when they go to the museum and there's like shit coming alive all around them.
Sort of. That's one I can kind of chalk up to coincidence.
Yeah, possibly. It is possible.
Because that was the spell apparently having an effective area, effective range. They cast for range instead of precision.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not even an RPG player, and I'm like, I'm able to make these references. But so yeah, they go into they follow like Garris's tracks into the church through the back, and Connie and Hilton go in through the front, or Tim, I should call him. But O'Connell, right before things go to pot, he sees a statue with a scroll in its hand, and he somehow makes the connection that the jackal statues have the scrolls inside them.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's all very contrived to get to the point. And I think that's the kind of problem with this script, is that the amount of contrived moments kind of proves that it's way too clever for its own good. You know, it tries to be clever, but then it can't really pull it off.
Yeah, it gets a little much.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're in the church, and then Garris starts wrecking shit. Once again, killing some random innocent bystanders.
Yeah.
And then he gets scared off by a baby?
Oh yeah, the baby moment was just because it's a christening, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't understand why he'd be afraid of that.
Makes more sense than being afraid by a cat.
Yeah, I suppose so. Well, a cat is still a better weakness than sunlight.
Oh yeah.
And moonlight. I thought the baby was going to tie into the reincarnation thing, but that's not what happens.
No. It's just random.
Because, okay, Garris fucks off, and then once again we go back to the townhouse of exposition.
Yeah.
And they put the bits of scroll together, because they smash open the statues.
Yeah.
And then Hendry helps them translate. This dude's doing really well for a blind man.
Yeah, it really is.
And the story here turns out that way back in the past, in West Egypt, born and raised, on the temple grounds where he spent most of his days, Garris was a priest of Set, as you do, and he was part of a secret inner cult which practiced special black magic. And he was madly in love with Anxanamen, the priestess of Isis. But she in turn was in love with someone else who was Garris' friend Ianos the Greek.
Yeah.
And I would have liked them to expand on the friendship aspect a little.
Yeah, it is literally mentioned once they are friends, but then there's nothing about it, you know?
And maybe give Garris a little more character. So alright, so what happened is that he grew so insanely jealous, and what he decided to do is he revealed secrets of the cult to Ianos, saying that there's a bargain you can make with Set for immortality, but you have to kill the one you love.
Yeah.
And I don't really buy the character shift here, because we're not really given enough with Ianos that he would be taken in by this. That he took the obsidian dagger and stabbed Anxanamen to death, and he immediately regretted it, especially so when Garris said, hey, you know what? She was pregnant.
Oh,
but don't tish. So that's why I thought the baby in the church would be the reincarnated baby, but that's not what happens.
No, but that extra bit just made it so cheesy.
So sadistic, but it makes sense why the guy would despair.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't really erase the fact that he still did it.
Yeah. And so he regrets it a lot, and he only wants to die, but because of the bargain with Set, he can't truly die. He will only reincarnate. And so Isis, realizing, his penitence is genuinely real.
Yeah.
Decides to give him an opportunity to square the account, and so she allows Anxanamen's spirit to fly out into the world and reincarnate until they eventually can come together and fix this. And oh, by the by, because he revealed secrets of the cult to an outsider, Garris got mummified alive by his cult and left to guard the entrance of the tomb of Anxanamen, which, once again, if they would examine it a little more closely, they would have found the treasure they were looking for.
Yeah.
Same goes for the Sommers movie. And so basically what happens is that Ianos sealed himself up within the tomb where he died, and that was the body O'Connell saw. And so Connie and O'Connell are the reincarnations of Anxanamen, and Ianos And so they have to figure out a way to square the account and defeat Garris.
Yeah.
And also, because they don't have the remaining 3 jackal statues, the rest of the scroll is still missing, so they don't know how to defeat Garris. And then we get, O'Connell and Connie being really, really mopey.
Yeah.
Really fucking emo.
To the nth degree at this point as well.
Where they're just hanging out on a boat, being obnoxiously emo together, crawling in my skin, these wounds they will not heal.
Yeah.
And so she gets sent away, although at least she's acting nice to people now. So I don't mind her being emo so much, but O'Connell just gets so mopey in this. And so she sends her away to Palm Springs to be with Tim Hilton's father, which is completely pointless because, 10 pages later, they bring her back.
Yeah.
And so she's sent away. Artist Bay shows up at the door of the townhouse and exposits that Garris is out of control, and he's been eating corpses to gain strength, which is just such a weird thing.
Yeah. I mean, again, that implies that this guy's more of a zombie than a mummy.
Yeah, a ghoul.
A ghoul, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, and so, he exposits this crap and then runs away, and then 2 scenes later, he's getting his intestines ripped out by Garris in the park. So what was the point of this character? He's just a cheap plot device to get Garris from A to B.
Yeah, that's literally the only reason he's there.
In the Universal Garris films and in the Hammer film, he does have, an Egyptian handler.
Yeah.
But he actually is a character who plays a role. He's not just there to be convenient and then run away. It's why is that there?
It's really... I think, again, it would have helped for another rewrite for this kind of crap. Because it just seems like they were just desperate to get the Ardeth Bay reference in there for no real reason.
It's honestly, at this point, I would have been more okay with Garris doing the fucking Ninja Turtles thing and wearing a trench coat.
Yeah.
It literally would have been less silly than this.
Yeah. Or do a Lecter and just appear.
Wears a terrible jacket on a plane.
Oh, yeah.
He gets Gillian Anderson to help him. But okay, so O'Connell and Tim, they start making plans to deal with Garris, and then O'Connell, for whatever reason, seems to believe that because the Institute has shut down, that Garris has moved back in there, for reasons I don't really understand.
Yeah, that's really it. Just because.
Yes, it's just weird. And so, okay, 2 things happen between when they finally go there and now. And that's, the police decide to tell O'Connell about this for reasons that baffle me. Is that they find the severed heads, because it was established earlier that Applegate had these 2 Native American toughs that he had dressed in Egyptian garb for display purposes, for publicity purposes. Their severed heads have been found on the docks.
Yeah.
And then later that night, in Tim's house, his 2 Belgian shepherds have been found headless, and they're oh, it's a warning, Garris could have killed us if he wanted to. This leads up to something really stupid.
It really does.
So, okay, O'Connell decides he's going to go, plumb the depths of the Institute to find Garris's lair. Okay, brace yourself for the stupid here. He brings the blind guy along as his backup.
Yeah.
Why? So, okay, they go into the Institute, they find the cellar. They go into the cellar and find a passage which leads them into an abandoned subway tunnel. I like the concept of the mummy's lair being in an abandoned subway because there's all kinds of, closed down tunnels and stuff under New York. It's a whole war in the tunnels down there. It's a really interesting idea. And so they find his lair inside this closed off room. And inside the lair is the 3 remaining jackal statues and the obsidian dagger, which Ardeth Bay brought along with them. Say it with me, Bridget. That's convenient.
Yeah, exactly. It's all contrivance because it's, like I said, it's trying to be incredibly clever, but have no way to actually pull it off.
And then, okay, so they smash open the jackal statues and get the scroll bits out, and Henry holds on to them. And he's like, O'Connell, take the obsidian dagger, we might need it. And he reaches for it, but he can't bring himself to touch it. Which remind me of 2 things. Silent Hill 4, when Henry touches the umbilical cord and has a spasm or whatever.
Right.
And also, the ending of Metal Gear Solid, no, I can't do it.
Right, yeah.
And so here comes the really stupid part. O'Connell freaks the fuck out and decides he's going to take the dagger and be a badass and go after the mummy alone. And he opens the far door, runs into a dark room, which we find out is just a single room, so he was stumbling around in a small dark room for ages. He leaves the blind guy by himself.
Yeah, I mean, it's just ridiculous, the amount of... I genuinely think they forget he's blind at some point, you know?
Yeah, because he's still able to interpret scrolls and find his way through the damn tunnel by himself.
It's really weird.
But okay, he hears something coming through the door, and he thinks it might be O'Connell. But then what pops out is just the silliest thing ever.
Oh, yeah.
It's a weird Frankenstein creature with body of one of those guys with the head of one of the Belgian shepherds on its body to be like a recreation of Anubis, which you could argue might have been nicked from Mummy Returns for the Anubis warriors.
Possibly.
This thing would be creepy. Except for several reasons. One, a Belgian shepherd is the goofiest, furriest looking dog you will ever see. And B, all I am thinking of is the damn dog-headed woman from Mars Attacks.
Yes.
And you were thinking of the dog clown from It.
Oh yeah. That's what I was trying to think of. It was very much like that, except in It was actually kind of shocking.
Yeah. Because
it was an actual dangerous dog.
Yeah, and this it's like bearing. It's also got its tongue lolling around like a silly dog. Like, what the hell is this thing?
The tongue moment just reminded me of the beginning of Day of the Dead.
But okay, so at the last minute, O'Connell pops out, pipe in hand, and starts beating the shit out of this thing. He goes, "Hendry, run!" And Hendry runs and somehow makes it out of the tunnel into the street alive, with no problems.
Which was a feat in itself, really.
He's a blind man.
Yeah.
So, okay, O'Connell knocks its fucking head off with a pipe, which that reminded me of something else where it's like you have to chop the monster's head off or something. I forget. But okay, so O'Connell makes it out to the street where boom, surprise, Hendry has run smack into the other dog-headed man.
Yeah.
Which tears him to pieces. So good on you, O'Connell. You got your ally killed.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the end of him as well.
Asshole.
Yeah.
Asshole. And he shoots the dog-headed man in the face and kills it.
Yeah.
Retrieving the scroll pieces.
A lot of it is just a lot of filler.
Yeah, and it's like, those two creatures were created in the space and killed in the space of like 15 pages.
And they don't have any kind of impact except for killing off a character who is practically useless anyway.
And so he takes the scroll pieces back, and Tim has them all put together, but he's not as good of a linguist as Hendry was. And so he says there's some weird, vague thing he doesn't understand about the blood of the mummy, and I give out something about the gaze of Isis.
Yeah.
Which, once we figure out what it means, I still don't know what it means. But he also says, oh, hey, we're going to need Connie to end this. He's like, oh, she's just going to love this.
Oh, yeah, he goes on about how, oh, it's so funny, it's ridiculous. And it's like, that's not funny. It's not funny at all.
So, okay. It turns out they get Connie back, so sending her away was completely pointless.
Yeah.
It turns out that in order to square the account, she needs to stab O'Connell through the heart with the obsidian dagger.
Yeah.
And he is so pissy, and he's just so emo about this, he fucking runs out of the building and tries to burn himself alive in the Institute.
Despite having been told that's the way it's got to happen, it's like, okay, fuck you, I'm going to go out the way I want to.
And of course, after he leaves, Connie is like, Tim, I'm pregnant, and the kid is his. Which is just awkward.
It's awkward, and it's terribly written. And it's just out of the blue as bollocks.
Tim Hilton, you are not the father.
Oh, God.
Okay, so as it goes on here, they save him from the building. He's so badly hurt, apparently, but he's perfectly fine like 5 pages later.
Oh, well, it's kind of weird. Because it's like, he's in the fire, but the fire is not affecting him, but then it does affect him, but not really,
It's so bizarre.
It is weird.
And so he's convalescing, and Connie is looking after him. Hilton is patrolling the street because they're on Gramercy Park, which this is a real place in Manhattan. I looked it up. It's not particularly big, but he's patrolling the park, and he's drunk for some reason, which comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, he just, out of the blue, decided to just get smashed.
He passes out, and during this, it's revealed that all of the graves at this church have been opened. So I'm like, oh great, Garris ate them all.
Yeah.
But no, it turns out Garris created a bunch of patchwork Frankenstein mummy men.
So it's Night of the Living Dead, basically.
And he brings them, they surround the house. One of them has Hendry's head.
Yeah. Which, by the way, when you're making, an army of zombies, make sure you take the blind guy's head, because that's going to be really useful.
Also, make sure you give them the fucking Solid Snake soldier genes, because no one sees these things in the streets.
Yeah.
And completely missed a drunken man that you could easily have killed.
Yeah.
So yeah, they get in, and he basically grabs Connie and takes, after this weird scene where he bitch slaps her. And then she's like, oh, I'm pregnant, which makes him just take her with him. And so they figure out that, she's been taken to the lair, so we have to go back there again. Mm-hmm. And so they go through the burned down building's basement. I'm sure Applegate is very happy about that. Yeah. Go down into the tunnel. They're fucking fighting these things. God knows how many there are. O'Connell chops Hendry's head off with like a Bowie knife, I think.
Yeah, kind of reminiscent of the ending fight scene in the film, but not really.
A little bit, but it's like barely a page.
Yeah, in the film it's a lot more action-packed.
And okay, so this is where the weird things happen, is that, they make it to the lair, they go into the inner room, which is now all lit up, and so it's just a room that O'Connell was apparently tripping over himself in for ages. There's all these statues of the gods, and at the end are Set and Isis. And Connie's like, no, I can't stab you, O'Connell.
Oh, and that goes on for so goddamn long as well.
Yeah, and then so O'Connell goes, slashes at Garris with the knife, and he gets fucking thrown against the wall, and his back is broken, so he's dying. Yeah. Hilton actually tries to fight him, but then he gets punched into his body, his spine grabbed, and then snapped, so he's dead.
Yeah, and even then, she's still like, I can't do it.
No, I can't do it. But no, then she finally stabs O'Connell in the heart, killing him, and it's like, and Garris is like, well, I wasn't expecting that.
It is that sudden as well as like, well, shit, never mind.
And then I don't really understand what happens here, is that the Set statue stares at Garris and it makes him bleed. The blood falls down onto O'Connell, and then the Isis statue's eyes open, and the light pours down onto O'Connell and heals him and makes him better.
Yeah, it's bullshit happy Hollywood ending, basically.
I'm not really sure why that happened.
No.
Like, just in universe, I'm not entirely sure what happened.
Yeah, it's really stupid.
Garris dissolves, blah, blah, blah. And then it cuts to them, they found Ankhsenamon's tomb, and O'Connell is like, I'm sorry for what I did in my previous life, blah, 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 and then they seal up the tomb with dynamite. And then, their baby's been born, and it has the little birthmark on its hand, proving that it's the reincarnation of the dead baby. And that's the end.
That's the end, thank Christ.
This script would have been fine. Fix the fucking horrible characterization in the first half, and then streamline the second half.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's streamlining because it's way too trying to be clever, but it's not clever at all.
It's just overly complicated nonsense.
Yeah.
It's to the point where it's just like, I really don't care. Because you established your characters is just annoying. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
And while Garris going on the rampage can be very cool, I don't see the need for him to make his Frankensteinian army of mummies.
No, and they don't do anything.
No, they don't. There's no point to them. Like, he could have done all the stuff he did all by himself.
Yeah.
And, like, really, the only ones that do anything significant are the damn stupid dog-headed men.
Which, again, what they do could have just been replaced with Garris doing it.
Or you could have kept his fucking Egyptian handlers around for a while.
That too.
And given them a purpose. Because here, I'm like, I don't even know why they bothered bringing him to New York in this unless they're tied up in the Destiny crap.
Yeah.
Without even knowing it.
It's just so ridiculous. And it definitely needed at least a couple of more rewrites.
And I can honestly see why someone at Universal looked at this and went, we can't make this.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, like, I like the idea of a mummy killing people in brutal ways. If I wanted to see that, though, I could just watch the mummy segment of Waxwork.
Right, yeah.
Which is only about 5 minutes long, and it's much better than this.
So, yeah.
But, yeah, it's not very good. Now, to go into, the remaining background stuff. Okay, here's the quote.
Right.
Okay, you're gonna call bullshit on some of this, but they wrote a really good script, but it was very dark and scary and bloody. It was truly like a descent into hell, probably the most violent version of the script we'd had since Clive's, the transsexual one.
Yeah.
But there was another change of administration between when we hired Kevin to write it and when he finally turned it in. The new people didn't want to make a movie like that.
Okay.
And so that's when Stephen Sommers came in and did his thing.
A lot of this criticism stuff kind of boils down to them saying, write us a script And then when they do, it's like, we didn't want that script. It's like,
Yeah.
they don't trust the writers at all, and they don't give them any kind of leeway. It's like, we have an idea, we want you to write that idea down, but we're not going to tell you what it is. It's so irritating.
Yeah. Especially the whole Terminator with a mummy crap.
Exactly.
And what I find interesting about all this is that they say their rationale for making it a period piece was so that it wouldn't be self-aware and something of a comedy, and you wouldn't have to explain why they've never seen the Mummy movie. I'd argue you don't even have to go there. In fact, I think this first few scripts covered that perfectly fine.
Yeah, there was none of that in any kind of, distracting way. But even then, the film we got was kind of comedic.
Yeah.
A lot of it was comedic.
I'd argue it's a little bit self-aware.
Yeah. But, and there are some great funny lines in those films.
I mean, there is a comedic gag in that. Like I hate it when they do these things, like the mummy popping out.
Yeah.
I'm glad for the movie that we got. Would I have liked to have seen like an iteration of one of these versions be made? Sure. Yeah,
I mean, something a bit more horrific, a bit more, in line with it being a dark horror, maybe.
Or like the whole idea of the modernized version of the original movie, I think is a clever idea.
Yeah.
And it's executed well enough in the drafts that just a little tweaking, you could have had a very good movie.
Tweak it and make it a bit more memorable, because I think as well, I think I mentioned this when we did the first script, is that there's not much in terms of standout moments, and I think it needed that.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I mean, even this last one is not good as it was if you just did a heavy rewrite, kept the characters more or less the same, just better.
Yeah.
And fixed a lot of the weird, silly shit and the weird plot issues, it would have worked. Yeah, so yeah, that's The Mummy, I guess. I mean, there was a very early draft of the new film that I have, but it's supposed to be almost completely different.
Oh, right, okay. But then
and I read it, and it was shit.
Then again, maybe it's better than the film.
I don't know about that. I mean, it was the most boring, generic shit. It ripped off Last Crusade twice. So.
Right.
But okay, so that's The Mummy.
Yeah.
If you like this episode, check out, the social media pages, Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, the RSS feed, the blogger feed, Deusdaecon's channel, of course.
Yeah, you can check out. I reviewed all 3 of the Mummy films, and I think they're pretty good. The videos, the videos, not the movies.
Especially two of the Dragon Emperor.
Yes, so, yeah.
But, check out his channel, check out this show, check out the other episodes, please, and until next time, take care, walk like an Egyptian, and bye.
Bye.